The battle between the Imperial forces and the rebels had entered its final phase, scattering the seeds of chaos throughout the country. The 9 divine generals had abandoned their duties, and the arrival of the mysterious group from the west had contributed to the chaos. Standing upon a pile of debris, Vincent raised his voice on the impromptu stage. "Abide by me. The situation is no longer remotely close to that of conflict between the Imperial Army and the insurgents. The intervention of a third party has changed the conditions of victory." Vincent Valakia's declaration had been heard by Gaz Ralfan and Olbart Dunkelkin, as well as Burstets and Ubilk the Stargazer. He informed them of the resurrected Balroy, and the others informed him of not just Lamia Godwin's revival, but other members of the Imperial family as well. Vincent turned to Ubilk, asking if he was aware of the specific detail, and he shook his head. All he was aware of was that Vincent's death would cause the great disaster. Gaz told it to leave it to him, only be told to keep quiet. Abel put his hand on his chin, trying to piece together the situation. When Cecilus chimes in, asking what his role here is, Vincent's mind kept spinning round and round. Mogaro battled Missouri and Balroy, water flowed out from the Shatter Reservoir, and Cecilus was tiny. Only he did not fit into this plan. The boy tells him that even if he is the Emperor, he doesn't bow to people just because of that. Vincent lets some air out of his nose and states, "Just like Natsuki Subaru, is that so? It is not new for you to not follow orders, so feel free to run around as you like." As Cecilus begins to make his leave, Vincent calls to him again. "As per our former agreement, I shall prepare the stage for your grand moment." Cecilus left with a small laugh, and Vincent turned towards Burstets and spoke loud enough for everybody nearby to hear him. "We shall abandon the Imperial capital. We shall retreat while maintaining as much of our military strength as possible." It's really interesting for Vincent to kind of experience his own Chaos Flame moment here. It can kind of clue you in on the feelings Vincent is experiencing since we saw how he spoke to Yorna during it, especially as emotions are running high for him, and he had a hard time looking away from the place Chisha had met his end. Subaru's group rides through the capital in a whirlwind of chaos and confusion. Subaru was aiming for the Crystal Palace, aiming for the fake Emperor. If he could be defeated, it would put an end to the civil war in the Empire that Subaru was inevitably embroiled in. Idra calls to Schwartz, "Something is wrong. These guys keep springing up." Subaru noted the paleness of their faces and their golden eyes. They were obstructing Subaru and the others. No, they were not standing in the way of only Subaru. They also attacked the Imperial soldiers. These enemies did not care about Subaru's feelings, and were relentless in their attempts to take lives of the Imperial soldiers, meaning Subaru calls to Tanza, who charges like a speeding ball into the ranks of the enemy, and catches up with those who were about to take lives, cleaving them in the back. Looking on, the bodies of the beings Tanza attacked were shattered into pieces, like a china cup on the floor. There was no blood either. Subaru wonders how they work, like a puppet or a robot, and Beatrice supposes that it could be the sacrament of the Immortal King, a kind of magic that upon death returns the soul to the body which it has left. A forbidden technique, I suppose. It was originally researched by Mother, but it was supposedly left incomplete. Subaru asks Idra to stop the horse as he looks down at Bayako and asks if the zombie magic stops when the user is defeated. Fiddling with her rolled hair, she says that with yin and yang magic, when the caster dies, the effect of the magic cuts off. She, however, has not seen this magic realized. Since the Imperial soldiers were being attacked, Subaru thought it was certainly possible that there was a necromancer in the rebel army, and that the unscrupulous and cold-hearted Abel might have resorted to inhumane tactics. However, something was off with the implementation and how the zombies had appeared out of nowhere. These zombies gave off the impression that they did not invade from outside, but that they were created from within the city and were rampaging around. Moreover, although it was ultimately a vague impression, he felt that while Abel would not use the actual dead for military purposes despite resorting to death for political purposes, he suspected that Abel's view of life and death, or the general Valakian one for that matter, would not allow for that. Therefore, the existence of the zombie meister should be considered an irregularity. If the war doesn't end when we beat up the fake emperor in the castle, then Idra asks him what's next. This was not a sign of him tossing responsibility to Subaru, but rather a reaffirmation of his willingness to risk his life together with him. Luis tugs on Subaru's hair, desperately pleading something to him, pointing to the north side of the capital. He knew what she was saying. Subaru looks towards the Crystal Palace, and calls out that there is a change of plans. He has to pick up something important. Beatrice was at a loss as to how to handle Luis. Without her mysterious teleportation ability, it would not have been possible to save all those lives. This single act alone could not have dispelled the responsibility of Luis being the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, and yet, Betty can trust that you have no animosity towards Subaru and the others, I suppose. Sitting awkwardly on the shaking saddle, although only the size of children, 3 people aside from the primary rider rode on the running red Galewind horse. Other than that era in which there were several witches bearing the deadly sins, that era when everyone was struggling to survive, was a dark period that was like a child's nightmare come true. The situation here was a return of the same thing. She wondered what could have triggered it, and her heart skipped a beat. While Beatrice held those frustrations in her heart, she heard Subaru's panting yet determined voice, calling out for Rem to hang in there. As Beatrice thought of the results of the time that Subaru had spent with Luis, separated from her, her chest became a hazy mess. but she understood that there was trust between them. Beatrice, too, had no doubt Rem was there. Looking back, Louise had spent a large amount of mana to extinguish the magic crystal cannon and went straight to Subaru to try and save the disappearing Beatrice. She had the power to locate those she was looking for. Interesting little view into the life of 400 years ago from Beatrice. It's not super often we get these windows into what it was like, but it sounded brutal. Constant warfare, the witches roaming the earth. The only view I've had into it so far, besides main story flashbacks, are Loving the Days Gone By, which basically centered around a village having to sacrifice its people to a dragon, and a short side story about Alec Hoshin that quietly delves into the dynamics of the heroes of that era. If you're interested in some old era crumbs, then those would be good places to start for side stories. They approach a huge mansion, and Subaru calls Natanza to destroy the wall. She does not want to give the wrong impression. She is not a tool for destroying walls. She says this as she plunges straight into it, using her thick-soled shoes to cause it to collapse. After rushing through the smoke, Beatrice noticed a gathering of people. Ahead of them, at the entrance of the separate building, there were several figures in front of the firmly shut door. All that could be seen was a back sporting the ragged equipment of an Imperial soldier, and facing it were two figures, one of which Beatrice did not recognize. The other was a girl she recognized quite well. However, Elminia. The ensuing deep purple arrow captured the back of the pale man, transforming them into crystals. Kept you waiting, Rem. The real star has stepped onto the stage. With one eye closed and teeth gleaming, Subaru made a pompous declaration. Despite his childish appearance, Beatrice looked at her partner from within his arms, proud of his unchanging bravery and scrambling to help someone. The eyes of the girl whose life was saved widened as she met the gazes of Beatrice and Subaru. As it were, the excitement and emotion quivered within her throat. Who are you? Subaru waved his arms and sorrowed at that unexpected cold response from Rem. Setting aside Louise, who already knew me in this state, it's quite something that Beatrice would accept it right away. It's not that I thought nothing of it, I suppose. It's merely that, whether you have shrunk or not, it will not change that you're Betty's partner, in fact. More importantly, that attitude is completely different from what Betty had heard from Subaru, I suppose. That girl, Rem, was supposed to have been gentle towards Subaru, in fact. Was that a lie, I suppose? He keeps waving his arms after misunderstandings. No, that wasn't a lie, it's just that she's forgotten a lot right now. Flop recognizes Subaru immediately and begins cheering out his nickname of husband. Rem is confused. By calling him husband, wouldn't that mean... Rem stared down towards Subaru once again, faced with the doubt emerging within her pale blue eyes. Subaru adjusted the angle of his face to give her a better view and flashed his teeth. The hue of doubt turned to dismay, which then quickly turned to surprise. She narrows her eyes at him. I thought you were a very strange person, but not only can you dress up as a woman, but you can even turn into a child? His smile disappears instantly. That's wrong, this situation is out of my control. Tilting her head in response, she asks him a question. You went through all this trouble to search for me? As the chaotic atmosphere dies down, he nods his head. I didn't know you'd been kidnapped until I was en route, but the moment I found out, my selfish feelings surged up. The only thing that made me certain you were here was... Wedging herself in between Subaru and Rem, it was Louise who jumped up towards the ladder, embracing her. Rem is relieved. She was worried that she would have been mistreated by that man. Subaru pouts. No matter how you look at it, would I really treat her so poorly that you would be worried? Did I do that? I did, didn't I? I probably did do that. I regret it now, though. We've made peace. Rem turns her blue eyes towards Louise and asks if that is true, and with a broad smile, she nods her head. Even though Betty intended on accepting it, it's still a scene that gives a very bad feeling, in fact. Such a thing like that girl and Rem being so friendly towards each other, it's a strange feeling, I suppose. Tanza warns that they do not have the time to sit idly by, and Subaru asks Rem if anybody else is here, and she informs him of Katya, and also a detached building full of black-haired crown princes. Idra clearly expresses his displeasure at the imposter crown princes who seem to be held captive, and Beatrice nodded in agreement. Subaru says there's nothing to discuss. If they are left here, the zombies are going to kill them. They do not have a choice but to help them. Tanza's eyes widened at that answer. She was the only one who had been told that Subaru's claim to the Empire was a lie spread for the purpose of creating a disturbance. A huge reason why everyone was gathered here was the belief that Subaru was the prince. If the captive false crown princes were released, the chances of that lie being exposed would increase. But that is that, and this is this. Even though he was aware of Tanza's concerns, Subaru would not sacrifice human lives to protect a lie. As expected of Betty Subaru, I suppose, she proclaims while tightly holding onto his hand. For a moment, there was a tingle flowing between them, but Subaru put it aside. He asks if Tanza would be the master key once again, apologizing to her for using her as a tool to break walls once more. Tanza released a deep, deep sigh. She gripped the padlock hanging from the door, and with a sudden strong jerk, the lock twisted off. Subaru calls out, "Let us put away our various grudges and work together to get out of this place." To his words, 14 or 15 boys turned towards him. Surprisingly, the cells were clean, and they were being properly fed. Any who were suffering extreme weakness could not be found. They were ready in case one truly was the Crown Prince. Subaru lets them know that Tanza can break them all out, and asks where Katya is. Rem lets him know, and Flop informs him that she has bad legs and cannot walk. He is concerned that Tanza is their only decent fighter, but Betty says that they will not be outdone by her, and Idra is a decent fighter. Just in case, Tanza should come along too, in order to reassure this Katya person, if Rem or Flop could also come, then you don't need to worry about that. I already got Katya out safely. Subaru's words were cut off by a voice from outside. No, merely being interrupted was not why his words were cut off. It was because Subaru's heart was pierced by something cold in that voice he had heard. Beatrice noted something was wrong when Subaru's body instinctively grew tense. Without responding to her words, Subaru quickly headed to the entrance of the detached annex, before Rem and Flop, who were already standing there, even had a chance to turn around, to confirm who it was and then to keep them away from Rem. I really have to say, this is some peculiar coincidence. How else could we end up in this situation? We probably all have our own respective circumstances, but for the time being, why don't we put aside our troublesome grudges and work together to get out of here? Thus, the man repeated Subaru's statement from just before, as if to ridicule it, and shrugged his shoulders. And so, the adversary with whom Subaru grew the most troublesome and fateful bond during his stay in the Empire, Todd Fang. I absolutely love this setup here with Subaru and Todd being put into a position to work together, and of course, this is a conflict I've been waiting for since their encounter, but also non-encounter in Phase 6, which amounts to the climax of their relationship. One aspect I really like about this encounter is how it plays into Subaru's ever-changing sense of identity in Arc 7 and 8. He first met Todd as Natsuki Subaru, the man who couldn't be a hero, then as Natsume Schwartz, the woman who was a hero, and finally, Natsuki Schwartz, the one who has taken the hero complex to the maximum. Super fascinating stuff is coming for sure. Anything with Subaru and Todd is really good. The petrification that Subaru experienced was one of the most foolish choices he could make before that man. Even for him, who had experienced all kinds of hardships, even death, over and over again, the indescribable eeriness of this man made his mind go blank. Before Subaru could even move his trembling lips, Rem shouted out to Katya. She demanded Todd stay away from her, and Luis growled at him. Even in this situation, it was not difficult to imagine that he would try to use Katya as a shield to manipulate Subaru and the others into doing his bidding. Of course, it was obvious from Subaru's previous encounters with Todd that the outcome of giving in and doing what was told would ultimately result in death. However, it was impossible to know how far he would reset. The situation had been going well, almost too well. It was impossible to calculate how many retries it would take to reach this point. If he had decided whom to save, whom to let survive, and whom to move forward with, Subaru had decided with steadfast heart to firmly grasp that outcome. Katya yells out to Rem, "She hasn't been captured. Todd is not your enemy." Todd, however, put his hand on her shoulder, preventing her from moving forward. She cries out that he is putting himself in danger, and Todd tells her that she is the one in danger. He cannot overlook the woman he loves endangering herself. Rem stammers, "Could this be? That person is..." Katya responds clearly, "This is her fiancé." Subaru was just as shocked as Rem to hear this. She asks if he's really her fiancé, and he confirms. "It's an unconventional arrangement. I never thought Katya and you would be getting along so well during your confinement. Don't look at me like that. Of course, I'm not saying we had a good first encounter or a good relationship either, but this situation we're in, we both have to let go of our grudges, don't we?" Shrugging his shoulders at Rem's silent gaze, Todd spoke up brazenly. Then his gaze turned not to Rem, but to Subaru. "What the kid said is true, right?" There was no hint of hostility in Todd's demeanor as he closed one eye and winked at him. Flop's soft face took on a serious look as he asked who this man was. Rem says that she has had several encounters with him before, and every one of those times her life was in danger. Katya's eyes widened and she looked at Todd beside her, asking if that's true, and he confirmed that he is an army man. Sometimes he has to turn his weapon on someone. That kind of thing, it's one of those unwanted situations. Rem butts in. It wasn't unwanted. He went out of his way to, but he retorts that he was just following orders like any other soldier. He has nothing personal against them. As he said this, Todd took the axe worn on his waist. For a moment, a tension ran through Subaru and the others, but Todd, keeping one hand outstretched, heaved it away. A parabolic arc drawn as the axe slid across to Subaru's feet. Luis picked it up, looking back and forth at Subaru and Rem. Todd raised his hands and waved at Subaru and the others, who had recognized this fact. Squeezing her own arm, Rem glanced sideways at Subaru. Betty, holding onto his hand, speaks out that she will follow Subaru's decision. He gulps, looking up at the man before him. "Katya is Rem's friend. I want as many of us as possible to get out of here unscathed. We don't have the time to squabble here. That's what I think." He hangs his head, biting his lip. Rem stiffened her cheeks in frustration. Just like Todd, you cannot leave a bomb unattended, not knowing when it may detonate. Todd, looking directly towards Subaru, says, "Since you've accepted me, I'll have to return the favor. Thanks. I'll also have to prove myself to Katya, who has treated me so gently." There were three reasons why Subaru could not reject Todd's presence. The first was the presence of Katya. Having apparently developed a friendly relationship with Rem during her time in the mansion, she appeared to be a good person despite her sharp-tongued nature, having properly shown Subaru and the company that she was not a nefarious sort of person. From all appearances, she did not have the slightest idea of who Todd was at the root of his character. But no matter what Subaru and company accused him of here, betting on whether she would believe her fiancé or them was a poor gamble. If so, should they choose to part ways with her due to their dislike of Todd? Thinking of her in her wheelchair, Subaru could not leave her behind. The second was that Todd's actions had all been undone in previous attempts due to return by death. With his ruthless nature and cool-headed judgment, Todd had on numerous occasions cornered Subaru, taking his life. Not just that, sometimes taking the lives of his cherished friends. Subaru's strong feelings of hatred and fear toward Todd were probably due to the fact that he had taken the lives of his friends right before his eyes, more than any other person Subaru had ever encountered in this world. Todd likely had effective strategies against the zombies. That was the third and final reason why Subaru welcomed him in. At first, Subaru was afraid he was the one to trigger the zombie outbreak, but as it was an unanswerable fear to consider, he trampled it down for now. Because of the poor footing and choice of route to bypass the group of zombies, combined with the speed of the fake crowd princes led by Idra, the speed of travel was not fast. That's when Beatrice calls towards their feet, as they find water flowing on the inclined group. Todd points the tip of his return axe towards the Crystal Palace, as he verbalizes Subaru's sense of crisis about the coming flow of water. Moguro doesn't stand a chance against the Cloud Dragon. Subaru asks him how they will proceed when Moguro falls, and Todd says that the zombies are trying to kill the living. When Moguro falls, the zombies would completely destroy the walls of the reservoir, causing the water to flood without end. If that happened, everybody present would be swept away. Todd likes the word zombie, repeating it to familiarize himself with it, and Beatrice asks how he feels about them. They are Imperial soldiers just like you. He retorts that they are not his allies, they just wear the same clothes. If they're dead, they aren't soldiers or anything, they are just troublesome obstacles. Talking about whose pawns they are and what their goals are, I don't think that's important for survival. That's something for the big shots to think about. Turning his head towards Subaru, he tells him that he has a reliable partner, but it would be better for him to talk it out with her if he's feeling worn out. His tiredness was partially because of his strong vigilance towards Todd, and partly because Beatrice's magic was using his mana. But the greatest burden of all was taking down the zombies. It was painful to destroy zombies that could speak and had something close to the will they had during their lifetime. Todd stops, looking ahead of their path. There is a rather tough-looking zombie just ahead, a member of the Cyclops tribe. He stood out the most in today's battle. In the center of Ismail's face was a large blue eye, fixed clearly on the future without hesitation. Nay, it had once done so. Now Ismail's single eye was as if a golden moon had emerged in an otherwise moonless night, the very manifestation of an evil omen. Todd informs his team that this man is comparable to a general, and that there is a significant power gap. No matter how hard the wind blows, it cannot bring down a castle. With the clock ticking as water makes its way towards them, they will not have time to go back the way they came to find another route. The group places their expectations on Subaru's shoulders yet again, and with his hand on his chin, his gaze met with Todd's, who happened to look in Subaru's direction at the same moment. Subaru and Todd both speak. Let's beat that zombie. At that instant, lightning flashed in Subaru's head, and the electrifying feeling of it felt very reliable and bitter, because Subaru was acutely aware in his soul that they had both intuited their mutual conclusion at the same time, and that what it would take to accomplish it would be a combination of strength and wisdom. Ismail turned around the moment he heard a loud noise. A house was torn out of the ground and thrown. He raised his battle axe, and the blade of it slashed directly up from below, slicing it into two vertical sections. He charged towards the enemy, as the houses and rocks came straight for him. Through the smoke, he saw a big man and a little girl. The man threw rocks, and the girl pulled entire houses from the ground. He understood that neither of these two were genuine warriors, yet they had somehow developed a warrior spirit, something he indeed respected. As he tore through the third house cannonball, a shrill noise resounded as the window glass shattered, and he saw himself reflected. Ismail was smiling. Instead of feeling repugnance at that smile, a vehement exhilaration boiled inside of him and erupted with the sound of laughter. Slamming his battle axe towards the fifth building, which seemed to be their final resistance, Ismail would try to bless the applause of his boiling blood with real blood. And, as expected, only having one eyeball really confines your vision, doesn't it? No, absolutely not. That was not the ridicule of just somebody. For Ismail, that voice was the utmost abhorrent, a symbol of malevolence. His raised morale from just before vanished, and the one seen by his golden eye was a single orange-haired Imperial soldier lying flat on the floor of the destroyed house. Instantly, his battle axe changed trajectory, about to strike down upon him. Just before he could drive all his might into his sworn enemy, Todd suddenly vanished from his field of view. It was nothing of this dimension, moving at insane speed. The next moment, Ismail's thoughts were completely painted over by black and white, but just before that, his giant eye had perceived a discrepancy. It had perceived a young girl of long golden hair clung to the leather belt of his prone sworn enemy's detestable form. A piercing impact bore through his left shoulder. What had pierced the walls of the house was a stone at high speed. The force caused his shoulder to violently explode. His thoughts came to a standstill, and his arm generated through inexplicable movements as if time was turning back. He switches his axe to his freshly repaired left hand, blowing the half-destroyed house away. Then he reached his right hand towards the sense of hostility. He caught a flying fist-sized stone head-on with his hand. Knowing he can no longer feel the pain, his hand is restored to its original state. At that moment, he sensed the arrival of a presence behind him as he leapt forward. It was not just one person, but 3 figures. A young boy with black hair, and held in his arms was a young girl in a dress. And the young blonde girl, who should have just been by his sworn enemy, was clinging to his back. At a murmured incantation, Ismail's instincts immediately tried to react by kicking off the debris. However, restraining those instincts, Ismail stretched his arm in order to swing his axe, an attack that would have been impossible in his former body. El Menya. An amethyst glow was fired, and Ismail dared to catch it as it flew straight towards him. He, who had planned to start his counterattack with a move impossible, had not even realized it. He had not realized that the hero of the Cyclops tribe, Ismail the Giant Eye, would have never made such a foolish choice. A lot of the time, I end up circling back to Todd's comments back in Arc 7 Phase 1 about healing magic being cruel because it can just be used to force you to get back up and be sent straight back into battle. And now, our gang is up against the incarnation of that very sensation. What Sphinx has done is realize not only the nightmare of healing magic, but also materialize the nightmare of return by death for many people around Valikia. It's a convergence of something Todd and Subaru can actually relate to, the pain of having to immediately keep pushing despite harsh circumstances. And now, it's an experience that can bond them together nationwide as the zombies suffer an even more brutal fate of having their personality altered to chase after their desires. Also, a quick note, I really like the little scene of Todd and Luis having to work together. It's a really interesting thing of, like, Subaru wants to save both of these people, or, like, forgive both of these people. You know, Luis, who he has forgiven and, you know, kind of saved in some sense, and then there's Todd, who he's still working through. I think that's interesting. Ismail had a terribly cruel, blood-scented, evil sneer on his face, sending shivers down Subaru's spine. Has he always been this way? Or perhaps did zombification do this? Subaru and Beatrice simultaneously held up their hands and pointed them at the enemy. Ismail believed he could take Subaru and his team's attack with no risk, until he took a serious hit from the purple arrows released from them, piercing the left half of his body. He did not pay attention to it, baring his teeth. A zombie's body broke in a brutal manner, much like pottery cracking. His broken body would then be repaired like a video played backwards, but he could not do it? The arrows in his body did not shatter, but rather remade the body into the same amethyst crystals. It shattered, but did not regenerate. This part of the phase was pretty interesting because, as we know, Subaru's goal right now is to save as many people as he possibly can, but what does he do about the zombies, you know? These are still people, just brought back against their will and altered to be a little different than how they truly are. He winces as the zombies get destroyed earlier, and it leaves him to wonder, how far will he go to save all of these people, especially those who have been forced to lose their original form, or, you know, lost themselves entirely? The group had noticed something similar. The closer the strike was to the heart, the slower the zombies' bodies healed. Minya, a spell of yin magic, had the effect of freezing the time of the target, which was a kind of instant death magic, something that was very effective against regenerating targets. The result of thinking about a strategy to hit a zombie was to make the enemy, who continued to demonstrate the ability it had possessed in life, understand the merits of becoming a zombie. The look in Ismail's eye was a whirlpool of emotions, a mixture of astonishment and understanding as he realized his defeat. Subaru bit his lower lip and cursed the unreasonable fate that had befallen this warrior. It came to pass after a moment of sentimentality washed over his heart. Subaru was called by Tanza in an urgent voice, and right then, Ismail's eye had changed color. It was not as if the color of the dead's instinctive golden eye had changed, but the astonishment and understanding that had been floating in it had faded, and it had been replaced by an intense hostility. Not yet, Ismail barks. In front of Subaru, gasping at the sight, the enemy, whose crystallization was advancing across the left side of his body, kicked something into the air. A fragment of a shattered house cannonball flew out, shattering the zombie's left arm, flying straight towards Subaru's face. It would have been a fatal blow, one that had him see the image of death, but Luis had intervened before it hit him and took his place. She took the hit unguarded and was sent flying from the impact. Beatrice yells at Subaru to not look away as she reaches out her hand to attack, but Ismail was not so simple-minded as to be fatally struck twice. He took on the damage in areas that were already crystallized, and he reached out, grabbing Subaru by the collar, pulling him to the ground. Choking from the pain of his back hitting the hard surface, Subaru saw the form of the enemy up close, and attempted to raise his hand with haste. But the opponent's determined form met his gaze, and his movement stopped. The way he looked, full of ambition and the will to fight. It was hard to believe that it was from a body that was already dead. His neck being constricted, desperate voices struck Subaru's eardrums as he gasped. Hearing that and the bones in his neck fatally creaking, Subaru's arms still did not rise. It was not that he was deprived of strength, but rather that his heart was no longer invigorated. Even though he knew that if he did not do it he would die, even though he knew that if he did not kill he would be killed, Subaru, unable to move, was supplanted by Beatrice, who had leaned in to fire her magic at the enemy. However, the enemy endured. The right arm that had tightened around Subaru's neck was defended to the death, the enemy attempting to at least take him along with them. It's because you are being strangely merciful. Immediately after such nonchalant words were spoken, the head of the enemy, the blazing sparkle in his eye trying to kill Subaru, was severed at the neck. Instead, emerging on the other side of the enemy's head was a stone-cold-looking Todd. Shaking off shards of the enemy's collapsed torso, Subaru lifted his hand at Tanza running towards him and assuring her that he was unharmed. Subaru hastily asks about Luis, and Idra assures him it's nothing serious. At his feet lay Luis, her upper body propped up, blood streaming from her forehead. He pulled Beatrice's arm, asking her to please heal her. For a moment there was hesitation in her demeanor, but Subaru did not notice it. He crouched down beside Luis with Beako as she held her hand over the wound on her forehead. While she healed her, Subaru held onto Luis's hand. His tight grip was returned weakly, as he uttered a repeated, "I'm sorry." All he would do was apologize, for it had been entirely his fault. Todd points out Beatrice's healing powers. "You've sure got a lot of people with rare powers around," he says, fixing his gaze on Subaru's slightly tense figure. "And yet, if you keep being like that, their talent's going to go to waste. You're aware of that, aren't you? Those who place confidence that they won't die in anything other than their own strengths are weak. This applies not only to the Cyclops we just killed, but to you as well." That moment of weakness that had passed through Subaru's mind as he saw his enemy shake off his looming defeat, grasping at victory. It was, as Todd said, the result of being overwhelmed by a thirst for life. Although the Pleiades Battalion was graced by the exceptional strength they had received from the effects of Subaru's Corleones, the members with whom Subaru had a close relationship, Idra and the others from the same unit, and Tanza, who had a closer relationship with Subaru than the others, received his deficiencies, becoming flushed with anger at Todd's provocations. Beatrice says that if Luis is active, there is no need to worry. Subaru agrees they should not linger. It's not unlikely other zombies will gather. As he was making sure not to get his priorities backwards, it happened. Whoosh, he heard a strange sound, cutting through the wind. It sounded like the swinging of a rope with something light strapped to it, but the events that occurred immediately after he heard the sound of cutting wind were not light whatsoever. A short groan spilled out and Tanza's body trembled. Having pierced through her back and abdomen, something akin to a tentacle with a sharp tip protruded. It extended from the direction of the street that had been destroyed in the battle, a long way from Subaru and the others. A grotesque torso growing from the head of his male that had been kicked away by Tanza, extending tentacles outwards, was the figure of the zombie from just before. Subaru's thoughts were dyed white by the figure that trampled upon his imagination and understanding. Beatrice spoke up, her face turning pale. From one of the zombie's arms, the monster extended a tentacle. No, not quite a tentacle, but a finger, and it pierced through Tanza's body. The moment he saw it, the monster withdrew its long finger. Tanza's body spurted blood, and she collapsed onto her knees with a powerless thud. Subaru shouted her name, beginning a sprint, only to be pushed by Idra. His small body flew through the air without resistance, the monster's finger striking the position where Subaru had been until just before. Todd grabbed hold of Subaru with his arm, clicking his tongue. How was this possible? Betty says the formula for regenerating its body is abnormal, staring at the monster with a look of frustration. Perhaps it is the result of rejecting death from damage that should have killed it. It clings to its life, or more rather, it clings to its death. Subaru calls out to Idra and Betty to save Tanza, and Idra grits his teeth. He did not want to act recklessly. If he died, their chances of winning would vanish. In the first place, Subaru mutters. Louise was injured by a fragment, and Tanza had a serious injury. The situation seemed as if they had entered a dead-end loop. Don't be ridiculous, Subaru cut off the foolish thought that had only briefly crossed his mind. A dead end of fate? There were loops that could not be resolved no matter what one did. Todd, who carried Subaru, had even brought about such a situation before. However, Subaru was there. Moreover, Subaru had been saved. Even if he had given up on himself, he could not give up on everyone else. Todd tells him he has a disgusting look in his eyes, the look of someone who treats their own life and the lives of others differently. As he says this, he kicks off the ground while holding Subaru. He turned his back on Tanza, Beatrice, and everyone else and made a beeline for escape. The creature, formerly known as Ismail, is targeting them. Todd tells him that when others are involved, Subaru doesn't think straight, and towards those words, Subaru was shaken. As he was stared at by Todd's icy eyes, he felt a fear equal to or greater than the approaching figure. Todd asks him if he has a way to take it down without Betty, and Subaru asks him, what if no way exists? Looking back up in front of him, Todd responds that he hates to do this, but he will leave it to chance. Subaru understood that he didn't really mean that. He would sooner use Subaru as a decoy and make a run for it. Conversely, if there is a way, you'll lend me a hand, right? In response to Subaru's question, Todd's expression tightened again. Todd used the obstacles to hide from the monster while Subaru kept scanning his surroundings, looking for a particular building inside the Imperial capital. He had come up with a plan besides the one hit with Minya, but since he had no way to lure it out, he eliminated that. Can you do it? Todd asks him. I'll do it, Subaru responds. Todd raised his eyebrows slightly in surprise, and then sneered with a twist at the corners of his mouth. As Ismail pursued the targets, his thoughts shattered to thousands of pieces. The reason for his obsession over these two fleeing enemies was something he could no longer recall. After achieving his goal, what would become of the monster thereafter? Little by little, Ismail shortened the distance, and with a short roar, Ismail's finger gouged his fleeing target's back and shoulders. Blood spurted, and a heinous smile appeared on his face as he heard the screams of his enemy. It felt good. With incredible enjoyment, more and more blood, more and more screams he wanted to hear. If the monster targeted their legs, his targets would no longer be able to escape. If that happened, then this would come to an end, and if it ended, he would be lonely. If it ended, he would be disappointed. His targets made a foolish choice to dive into a dead end, inside a building. Entering the dim building, the monster looked around inside. With a blink, he switched the way he saw the world, and searched for the figures of his hidden prey. As he searched, he realized there was so much flour flooding around that it was enough to stain the entire monster's body white. The thing that beats you isn't going to be magic or a killer technique. The monster turned around, seeing a small, bright red silhouette. At some point, the fleeing target had become just one person. Eat this, the soul of science. Dust explosion. He had no idea it would be this powerful as Subaru looked up upon the charred remains of the monster. He saw Todd on one knee, spitting out the saliva in his mouth. You almost got me killed there, man. What happened to our opponent? Subaru points to its blown-up, charred corpse and asks how Todd's injuries are. He says he was gouged out pretty much everywhere, and he feels like he is missing a lot of blood. It had defied Subaru's expectations that Todd would absolutely avoid any plan that would endanger his own life. Immediately, Subaru tried to move and speak, but Todd had cut him off. After all, if we've done this much, Katya won't be able to complain. She seems to think that I'm lazy. I helped us escape, defeated a really strong enemy, and even suffered honorable injuries. Don't tell me you're also going to take all the credit for yourself, huh? Todd said that with a shrug of his shoulders, and a pale face that was drained of blood. For a moment, Subaru was taken aback before letting out a exhaling a weak breath. Despite being in such a battered state, the one that still weighed on his mind was Katya. Perhaps he had also planned to untie Subaru's mental tension. Katya is truly important to you, huh? That's a given. She's my fiancée. Katya is my very life. Upon hearing that, Subaru took a deep breath, held it momentarily, and then by saying alright, he fired himself up. Even now, he was afraid of Todd. The things that man had done had left deep scars on his heart. Still, the fact remained that they had cooperated to defeat that monster here, even to the extent of getting completely battered. Todd had devoted himself to ensuring everyone, including Subaru and his friends, could get out of this alive. If that was the case, then now it was Subaru's turn. This sequence was super cool. I really like the Arc 4 reference with Subaru using science, but this time, it actually worked. And I love the two characters in the series right now who can't resort to magic or special techniques being chased by a decaying monster. Last arc we had Subaru being pursued by the monster he pictured as Todd, and now the two work together while being chased by a literal monster. I'm sure we could do some extrapolation here on the messages of heroes and monsters from Phase 7, but I'm not going to yap that much until we get to the end of this part. I also really like to see how desperately Subaru works to see the good in people. You can call him insane for it, but he tries actively to justify a mutual bond between him and Todd, and let's get back to Peak. Subaru plans to take Todd somewhere else because the explosion might draw others. Todd says he's counting on him, asking him to not leave him behind. Even if Subaru's position towards Todd had been a hostile one, he was unsure of whether he could have left him there on the verge of death. Even if he were to lend a shoulder to Todd, their height difference would make it difficult. Subaru looked around the blown-off mill, hoping to find something he could use as a makeshift cane. Then he found a support pole for a shelf that had been blown into the midst of the embers. At that moment, a hard sound rang out. "Why?" Subaru asked. He cast his eyes down and tightly clenched his fist. As his lips trembled, shoulders trembled in fear, he repeated it. Why? His question receiving his response. Subaru turned around as he exhaled. Just before his eyes was the blade of an axe that had been swung down, stopped just a hair's breadth away from crushing his skull. For it was restrained by that which was visible to none but Subaru, the unseen hand. My bad, my bad. With a small click of his tongue, Todd released the axe from his hand and jumped backwards. His swift movements showed no signs of blood loss or injury. Even that had been an act. The pain from his injuries, the pleas for help from Subaru, speaking of his feelings for Katya, which had softened Subaru's heart, all of it had been just an act. 3 times, Subaru fired off the same question, glaring at Todd with a face that looked like it was about to cry. While glaring at him, he felt tears welling up from the overwhelming frustration. Up until now, you haven't done anything. You haven't killed anyone. I could have even forgiven you. Quietly, you've slowly damaged my trust in you, Todd responds, drawing a knife in place of the axe he had released. That had been the declaration of the irreparable separation between Natsuki Subaru and Todd Fang. As blood was gushing from his gouged shoulder and thigh, the rough breaths filled with a feverish heat in his blood-drained complexion made it evident that the countdown to his death was ticking. Unless he received treatment immediately, his life would be in danger, as the countdown could not be stopped. Next to the pulverized mill, amidst the lingering smell of burnt wood from the remaining embers, Subaru faced off against an enemy in the increasingly flooded, even if slowly, Imperial capital. Calling Todd an enemy was not something Subaru wanted to do anymore. Ever since their very first meeting, Todd had continuously subjected him to all sorts of grief. Subaru had been targeted and killed numerous times, with death and fear etched into his memories that fostered a deep-seated grudge. Subaru had no intentions of pretending like Todd's actions had never happened. It was just that through Subaru's struggles of protecting what was dear to him by returning by death, these actions by Todd had gradually been erased. The reason why Subaru regarded Todd as an enemy was something that existed only within Subaru's mind, and finally, now that an unprecedented disaster had struck the Imperial capital and they were forced to retreat, Todd showed a willingness to cooperate with Subaru to protect his fiancée. That was why they had needed just one more step. If only he had taken one more step, Subaru could have walked alongside Todd without bottling up his conflicted emotions. Why, he cries out. Don't speak so hypocritically. You averted this just now because you also had a slight hunch. It's not like you reacted to my intent to kill. You were just wary the whole time, right? Todd closed his bloodshot right eye as Subaru trembled before him. With a face that seemed like he was dealing with an unreasonable child, Todd's gaze fell on the axe floating in the air. Or that was how it would have appeared to him as the weapon was grabbed by a black hand. Todd had hit the nail on the head. Subaru had been wary of him all along, so once he had turned his back on the injured Todd, Subaru had activated Invisible Providence to protect his head, as that would have been the surest way to kill him in case he was targeted. However, he certainly had not wished for it to happen. I fell right for your trap, Todd tells him. Subaru shakes his head as he trembles, telling him it's not true. We're separated from the others, so right after we took care of the enemy, I thought that was my chance, but you're quite the actor. Did you plan to blow me up with that explosion earlier? If that was the case, it's too bad that your aim was off. It's painfully obvious at this point that Todd Fang is the definition of projection. He ascribes the way he views others onto those he's with. Surely, Subaru must have been trying to kill him because Todd would have done the same thing. This is the quality of a deeply broken person. You know, Todd is not exactly well put together. We talked early into Arc 7 about how Todd is someone that Subaru has to encounter to evaluate how far he is willing to go for someone, and we also talked earlier in this video about the zombies. I think it's no coincidence that in the arc where Subaru is basically putting people back to rest, he has his climactic encounter with Todd, a man he's been struggling to accept the entire time. Todd and Vincent both stand in the way of Subaru's tolerance for saving and acceptance, and both act as a marker for how far he will be willing to go. There's an important lesson that people in particular situations learn, like lifeguards. There are times where you see someone in trouble and you want to rush to their side to do whatever you can to save them, but there are people you cannot save, because those people will thrash and struggle and take you down with them. Not only should you put yourself first, but you should also understand your own limits, and also understand that there are some people out there that don't want to be saved. Todd is someone who rejects Subaru at every turn, and he's going to have to accept that there is nothing he can do anymore, and at some point, he has to work to protect himself. Of course, Subaru and Todd are very close narrative foils, their circumstances are similar, they are both weak, they surround themselves with people that can benefit them, but their motivations for doing so are entirely separate. As Subaru once marched forward putting everything on his own shoulders, he knew Todd's position all too well. As narrative foils, think of this fight as Subaru versus a more twisted version of himself. In the light novel version of Volume 31 or Arc 7 Phase 6, he even explicitly tells Todd, I could have been like you, isolated and controlling. Subaru surrounds himself with people he genuinely loves and will do whatever he can to save them if they are within his reach, while Todd is indifferent and even distrusting of his comrades and will dispose of them in an instant if it benefits him. Subaru vs. Todd is the ultimate battle of accepting others versus self-isolation, and this can also be seen in the way they treat their closest loved ones. Subaru respects Rem's circumstances and her own autonomy, while Todd enjoys that Katya is entirely dependent on him and slowly isolates her. Can Todd Fang be saved? It's impossible to say, but Natsuki Subaru would try nonetheless. His values will not be glossed over in this Falakian wasteland. Now I'm going to keep quiet and let this wonderful fight unfold. With one eye closed, Todd looked into Subaru's eyes with a gaze devoid of heat and humidity. His gaze did not contain any hint of evaluating Subaru, which it had just moments ago. Todd had already finished appraising Subaru, and that was why he was like this now. You should get it deep down as well. We just can't understand each other. I am outwardly suspicious of others, and you believe others to a fault. No matter how many words we exchange, our values are different. Slowly changing position, Todd cautiously watched Subaru, especially his axe that floated in the air. Subaru also bit his lip and glared at Todd with sorrow over the hovering axe. They could not understand each other. Todd had said that. Subaru continued to wonder if that was really the case. He wondered if there was really no way to make it work. Subaru tries to convince him, "If you kill me, how will you handle the zombies?" But Todd cuts him off. "You don't know when to quit. As long as I get out of the Imperial capital, it's all good. Thanks to your help, we were able to get Katya at the city walls. After that, I'm better off without you." "Why? I have no intention to hurt Katya. I didn't even intend to fight you, but you were willing to choose whether to save Katya or not, right?" Subaru's cheeks hardened as he felt like he had been doused with cold water by his words. He had no idea what he meant. To begin with, that was at odds with what Subaru was claiming. There was no need to choose, as Subaru had no intentions of harming Katya in the first place, so such an accusation was misplaced. And yet, Subaru's thoughts were frozen. Todd did not miss that moment. "I won't beg for your forgiveness." Todd lowered his stance and lunged at Subaru. Every cell in Subaru's body screamed, and he immediately commanded the unseen hand, which was extended in the air, to throw the axe he had seized back at Todd. However, instantly, Subaru's vision was dyed bright red by a burning sensation that pierced his right thigh. A knife was sticking out of his leg. Right before he leapt, he had thrown it into Subaru's leg. The floating axe was snatched back in that moment of pain, and Todd's forward kick smashed into Subaru's chest. He fell backwards with a cry of pain, unable to put weight on his stabbed leg. His scattered thoughts became even more fragmented. Subaru frantically shouted and forced the black hand to stop the axe in the midst of swinging down. The overused unseen hand protruded from Subaru's chest to stop the axe that approached the tip of his nose, and he mobilized his own two hands to keep the trembling blade from falling. Then Todd, holding the axe, also pushed in with all of his might to force down the jostling blade. Subaru's leg that was stabbed hurt, his chest where he was kicked hurt, his back where he was hit hurt, his head hurt. If the axe were to go through his face, it would hurt more than all of that and would furthermore hurt to the point of death. "You're too tenacious. Give up and die already," Todd shouts down at the trembling, downtrodden boy. "No way. Absolutely no way," the subdued boy screamed back. He resisted with his three arms, but the child's two hands and authority, which had little advantage other than being invisible, could not push Todd away. From the outside, it would appear to be a very absurd and miserable deathmatch. The battle between Subaru and Todd was crude and unceremonious at such a critical juncture in the battle for the Imperial capital, where a multitude of soldiers and warriors competed with their well-honed skills and weapons. They had no trained skills, no special weapons, nor trump cards that could overpower others. By the standards of the Valakian Empire, this was a low-level battle of life and death. The decisive battle between Natsuki Subaru and Todd Fang, two people who could not understand each other. "You're too damn inconsistent," the man yelled. "Your eyes say that you're willing to die at any moment. You're willing to put other people's lives on a scale selfishly, but when it comes to this, you're desperate to resist. It's creepy. Don't say something so unreasonable. Like hell, I think I'm ready to die whenever. I've also never put anyone's life on a scale. I don't want to die." Todd's eyes, chilled with a black murderous intent, were about to freeze Subaru's racing heart. While the grinding struggle of the blade of the axe that was locked between the two continued, their fierce battle could not go on forever. Subaru stifled a grunt in the back of his throat as blood trickled from his earlobes. It was the backlash due to the heavy use of his authority. This was a screaming warning signal from Subaru's eroding body. However, he had no choice but to rely on it. Otherwise, his face would be cleaved in two. That strange trick seems to be nearing its limits. The ghastly look on Subaru's face and the outpouring of blood helped Todd understand the repercussions of using the unseen hand. He knew that if he kept going at this pace, Subaru would reach his limit first. Subaru and Todd, vying for the deadly axe, were momentarily distracted by the sound of a tremendous roar. It was something far away from the center of the Imperial capital, far away from Subaru and his companions. The reservoir at the edge of the city, which held back a large amount of water, had reached its limit and started to crumble. With a roar, cracks burst open through the entire retaining wall, and a tremendous amount of water surged into the Imperial capital. It was like a giant wave was advancing into a world without any oceans. For a brief moment, Todd's attention was diverted from the roaring sound, and Subaru gathered all the strength he could. He turned over onto his side and pulled the axe blade with all of his might with the unseen hand so it struck the ground next to him. Even Todd could not defy such momentum, falling to the ground with it. Subaru continued to roll sideways with his momentum, the knife in his leg repeatedly striking the ground and causing him severe pain. His body hit the remnants of the building, forcing him to stop. There he somehow managed to get up onto his arms, bleeding from his cut forehead, and then he spotted it. This guy is just utterly infuriating. Todd rose to his knees, mumbling in anger. As he turned to face the distant Subaru, he noticed the axe deeply embedded into Todd's left shoulder. When Subaru had managed to avoid the axe in his desperate attempt, Todd had fallen on top of it. The blade of the axe was buried deep, splitting his collarbone so far that it looked like it had reached his heart. But Todd, wiping his mouth and spitting out blood, showed none of the weakness of a dying man. It was like he was almost too tough. His body had been cut in various places due to his role as a decoy from the zombies. He had received collateral damage from the dust explosion, and to top it all off, he had an axe sticking out of his body, but he did not seem concerned about it. The reason for Todd's nonchalance finally became clear to Subaru. That was, "You noticed it? My bad, my bad." There was a clear irritation in Todd's tone that lacked frivolity and leeway. It was a voice full of excessive anger at himself, rather than at his opponent for his own failure of letting someone be seen that no one ever was meant to see. While fully displaying his anger, Todd violently ripped the axe out of his own shoulder. The badly mangled wound spurted blood once just strongly, then stopped bleeding right away. The ability to recover was something that would have evolved in a species in order to prevent negative effects of injuries from being too great while in combat or hunting. It was the kind of recoverability that Subaru had witnessed several times in this world. He was demi-human, and are you half beast-man? Todd confirms, but that's not all of it by itself. In front of the puzzled Subaru, Todd narrowed his eyes and affirmed only half of his suspicions. Todd answered Subaru's question with half an answer. His cheeks contorted inhumanely, his eyes lit up with blood-colored fury. "I'm a werewolf." In this world, there were certain things that were considered abhorrent just by their mere existence. Half-elves stood out preeminently among such abhorred beings, possessing the disadvantage of being tied to the witch who had once nearly destroyed the world. That reputation was shared across all countries. Elsewhere, hairless demi-humans were considered to be an unlucky thing in the Karagi city-states, and in the Holy Kingdom of Casteko, the closer the hair and eyes approached to black, the more alienated one would be, as they would be considered to be disliked by the spirits. Similarly, within the Valachian Empire, where various demi-human races coexisted, there were two races whose existence was frowned upon. The Mole People and the Wolf People. In ancient times, these two races were said to have been condemned for betraying the most beloved woman in the Valachian Empire and putting her to death, a crime for which they would never be forgiven. As a result, the Mole People had abandoned their homeland and escaped out of the country by digging into the earth. The Wolf People, who did not know how to escape, had been hunted down to the point of extinction. The wrath of this empire extended to neighboring lands, and if any Mole People or Wolf People were to be found in another country, they would be deported across the border to the empire to be executed. Hunts, as they were commonly called. In modern times, it was said that the Mole People used their abilities to burrow under the earth to hide from the outside world. As for the surviving Wolf People, they disguised their origins as Dog People in order to hide their true identities. And only one person in this world, Hollybell, did publicly advocate himself as a wolf person. An empire that relentlessly hunted wolf people, whose national crest was, ironically, a wolf pierced by swords. The sword wolf was the most revered symbol in the empire, whereas the wolf that ran away for fear of being pierced by a sword was the most despised. Therefore, in this world, both the existence of wolf people and half-beast men of wolf people blood, werewolves, continued to bear a curse that could never be forgiven. Subaru was absolutely stunned upon that declaration of Todd's, twirling the axe he had pulled from his shoulder in his hand. Knowing about the little-known secret of Todd, who was someone who had often clashed with him, and not knowing which emotion to feel, positive or negative, was one thing, but what he felt more than anything else was fear. It had been an instinctive aversion to the sound that had reached his ears, werewolf. Subaru had no knowledge of the history of ostracization of werewolves in this world. He knew nothing of the fact that both wolf people and mole people were abhorred in the Empire, that the reason of this was the betrayal of a woman named Iris, that her true identity was Yorna Mishigure, or that her beloved emperor was not Vincent Valekia. He knew nothing of any of the underlying circumstances. Even without knowing anything about them, Subaru's soul understood how alien the existence of werewolves was in this world. That look of surprise is a little different than I expected. You look surprised that I was half beastman, but not surprised that I'm a werewolf. But now we could do this without any strange reservations, right? Werewolves are meant to be hung. It's a curse that runs in their blood. You, too, Before Todd could finish his self-condemnation, Subaru interjected with a simple, "Why? Why does it come to this? I've never..." He could not say that he had never thought about killing Todd, but this was not because of Todd's blood or his origins, but because his own actions were incompatible with Subaru's, and he had no choice but to clash with him. And yet, the way Todd spoke now... Don't act like your blood is the reason you became my enemy. You ran into me many times because it was a problem between you and me, not because of what you are or because your blood provoked me. Grinding his molars, Subaru pressed his fist into the ground and raised himself up. The intense pain from the knife in his leg raced through his body at great speed, but also clarified his consciousness. It clarified the anger seething in his chest. And you have the nerve of saying it's because you're a werewolf or something of the sort, because that's what's convenient for you. Oi, it's convenient for me? I won't listen to this coming from you. Shut the hell up. Not a single thing had gone Subaru's way. When he had positive feelings, it would cause negative actions, and when he had positive thoughts, it would cause negative problems. After helping Katya, saving Rem and Flop, and joining forces to defeat that formidable zombie, he had now tried to kill Subaru, rebuking his thoughts, and to top that off, he was a werewolf. Don't go off and talk about the circumstances of people's birth. It's just how it is. My mother might have slept with a dog. Come to think of it, there was always a big dog living in the back of the house. Maybe that was my dad? No, I'm not the one talking about it. You're the one who's talking about your birth. I'm not the one who's looking at you like that. Subaru had no idea what kind of life Todd had experienced as a werewolf, nor did he even want to know. If he knew, he would probably search for a reason to forgive Todd, therefore, he did not want to know. Subaru did not want to forgive Todd for some unavoidable reason. That was why... I've made up my mind. His voice strained, his head jumbled with anger and pain. Hearing Subaru's muttering, Todd's eyes narrowed. Even without words, the silence prompted him to wonder what he had decided to do. I'm not going to kill you. It's not going to go the way you want. At Subaru's quiet declaration, Todd had nothing to say in return. However, he did not remain silent. He laughed. Ruffling his hair with his hand, Todd opened his mouth and laughed. Not caring that his hair and forehead were being stained with blood, Todd opened his mouth wide and burst out in laughter. He gently shook his head after and said, "You're a monster, much more so than that zombie." More clearly than ever, he glared at Subaru with emotion visible in his eyes. Subaru understood what it was, the emotion that was hidden behind that black murderous intent. This was the first time it was revealed. Many times before, he had seen it in the mirror. It was fear. It was the fear of incomprehensible things that brought death. Lack of self-awareness is a bad trait. You're choosing between lives, who to save, who to let die. You're deciding as you please. You show favor towards those who butter you up, but don't care about those who don't. Me? I wouldn't hesitate to butter anyone up. But how could I get along with someone who decides who lives or dies based on their own fickle whims? That was Todd Fang's ultimatum. Having spat that out, Todd's bones creaked as his form changed. The wounds peeking through the tears of his Imperial soldier's uniform closed. His skin was covered with animal hair that matched the color of his hair atop his head. His nose protruded and his mouth grew wide as if it were ripping open. Newly grown white teeth began to sharpen, transforming his appearance into that of a ferocious beast. Die. Briefly, Todd stepped towards Subaru once again. With that intention in his words, his steps were large, and he kicked the ground with his hind legs with speed such that it exploded. His aim was to kill Subaru, the object of his unknown fear, to not permit the survival of an opponent privy to his true identity. Subaru's fighting spirit exploded as he realized this. Invisible providence. Subaru picked up debris with the black arm that extended from his chest, and knocked the axe away to the other side, past Todd's head. But even if his axe was gone, Todd now had another weapon, his fangs. Subaru had also utilized the unseen hand to block the axe, thus being unable to block his fangs. Instead, Subaru pulled out the knife stuck in his leg with his own hand, screaming from the intense pain that he had never gotten used to, clamping it in the gap between Todd's fangs as he bit down on it. Like that, his fangs pushed forward, closing in on Subaru's neck. While desperately trying to hold him back, Subaru screamed that he would not kill him. As things stood, Todd would be able to overcome him, but even if he was to be dispossessed of his life by getting his head bitten off, even if he was to return to somewhere during the battle, feeling grief, resentment towards the world for unknown reasons unbeknownst to Subaru, the man known as Todd. That's enough. The sound of that voice caught Subaru by surprise, plucking resoundingly at his soul. Every one of the beast's breaths, every little rumble of the earth, every bit of ongoing chaos in various parts of the Imperial capital, it was all a noisy hell, in which every sound rampaged as it pleased. Even in such a world, nothing could impede that voice. It was as if the very existence of Natsuki Subaru had been created to resonate with that voice. Todd was hit in the side, being propelled into open view, and being reflected in Subaru's eyes were gleaming shards of raining ice, and what scattered them was a hammer fashioned from ice. Her eyes met Subaru's, and Emilia tells him to come here. Her fingers pulled his body up into her arms, and she bent her knees with an all right. With a shout, Emilia jumped and kicked the wall of a nearby building and leapt even higher onto a roof of another building. Below them, the street they had just come from was swept away at a tremendous pace by a muddy stream. Emilia patted her chest in relief, saying that was dangerous. Subaru looked down for Todd, unsure of the answer to the question of if he wanted him to be found or not. Emilia asks who he is looking for, but quickly notices how hurt he is. She tells him a healing magic user will be here soon. Subaru tells her that there's no time for that, but before anything could happen, another voice joined that was not welcome. You're the one who needs to get on your feet. Emilia's eyes opened wide, and he could see the scene behind him reflected in them. As Subaru sat on the edge of the rooftop, the werewolf came out from behind as it broke the water and opened his gaping mouth to bite Subaru's nape. Either the bite would pull him into the water, or it would mercilessly clamp down on his jugular. It was a moment that even Emilia would not be able to stop in time. Todd's dogged determination defied even the flash flood, attempting to gnaw Subaru's life away. Yet, another voice, however, would enter, a voice that Subaru had longed to hear as well. Don't touch him. At the same time as that yell, an axe was unleashed, swung with all of its might. Subaru had knocked it away earlier, and somehow it landed in the hands of Rem, and she returned it to its owner, who was trying to bite Subaru. A second strike, overlapping with the wound on his left shoulder, occurred. The impact threw off his momentum, and his huge body was knocked away, thrown into the muddy waters. With a loud splash on a column of water, this time, Todd Fang sank below the surface. The girl who had swung the axe was breathing heavily and held Subaru's head to her chest. It seems like you're fine, she says. He replies, not really, and lowers the corners of his eyes with a faint sense of relief. Then, he looks behind him for Todd, who had been thrown into the water by Rem's blow. He was nowhere to be found. There was no way he could be found. And even if he were to be found, with frustration and bitterness welling up inside of him, Subaru put his hand to his chest. Subaru and Todd could not understand each other in any way. What Subaru had wanted him to understand, and that Todd had not wished to be understood, none of it. That was what frustrated him. It was so frustrating and disappointing. Little by little, Subaru's strength slipped away on the edge of the rooftop, and right in front of him, the two women who had helped him, Emilia and Rem, were shouting this and that. This, with those two in front of him, the thought of how long it had been since he had last seen them talking to each other passed through his mind, and then faded. Todd, you goddamn idiot. With this sense of frustration and defeat as the final straw, Subaru's consciousness abruptly faded. Arc 8, Chapter 7, Todd Fang. Todd Fang was a soldier of the Valakian Empire, private first class's rank. He was the fiancé of Katya Arieli, the younger sister of his colleague Jamal. Starting with when he was dispatched to the Budheim jungle in the east of the Empire, by way of the battle with the rebel army in the fortress city of Garal, he had currently taken up the official position of the Spirit Eater, General First Class Arakia. The siege of the imperial capital, commenced by rebels who all simultaneously rose in revolt. In this battle, too, he participated as a foot soldier, fighting hard, wielding his weapon as he valiantly fought the rebels in order to protect the citizens of the imperial capital, and above all, to protect his fiancée. His true identity was that of an existence treated as abhorrent in the Valakian Empire, that of a werewolf, subject to a history of discrimination and persecution. He came to establish his own way of life as a being incompatible with others. That was unmistakably the werewolf of the Empire known as Todd Fang. On numerous occasions, he collided with the being known as Natsuki Subaru, but they never once got along until the very end. I have no intention of telling you anything other than that, man. This section of Phase 1 was hands down one of my favorite sections of ReZero ever. A fantastic climactic encounter between Kid Subaru and one of my favorite antagonists in the story, Todd Fang, his name being a bit more literal than we all had expected. The ending of this fight perfectly encapsulates everything that the relationship and inherent differences stand for, and a crude battle in the sea of large-scale combat, yet people come through to save Subaru, his connections and relationships circling back to prove why his strength will always overcome Todd's, because he would never put himself in a position to be saved or to be at the mercy of others. The moment Todd decided to pick a battle with a guy like Subaru, he had already lost. Even though Todd on the surface seemed like an existence that would have thrived in the Valakian Empire, not only did he find some parts of it detestable, we would find out in this encounter that he is a victim of its oppressive culture as well. It's an inherent quality of the Valakian content of ReZero. Every time you find someone who should, enjoy this way of life, there's always more to it. This strength-based, isolating lifestyle works for nobody, and the contradiction can be found in the crest of Valakia itself, an emblem of a wolf, used to propagate the image of a strong nation whilst killing that very image. Even Vincent Valencia, the emperor himself, has wanted to change the way this nation worked, put his life on the line to protect the weak, and even acted to save his sister. Valencia is a nation that hurts even those that should be the most successful in it. It is a nation born of self-contradiction and held together by a tenuous balance of power. If Todd's story tells us anything about the future of the country, it's that it cannot remain this way, and ReZero has a pretty clear stance on might makes right ideology, totalitarian regimes, and social Darwinism. Seeing Todd transform and have his wounds recover a bit also once again made me think back to his comment about healing magic. Seeing him literally heal puts a unique spin on this to clue us in a bit on Todd's life. As Todd heals relatively quickly and Subaru returns by death, their connection grows a little bit stronger as they both become accustomed to the feelings of extreme pain and to have the opportunity to rest taken from them because of their ability to recover. It's also just a cool perspective on healing magic because obviously it leads to good outcomes, but it also does lead to people being pushed right back out there to fight. Now, I know what a lot of you are going to be here about, and I even already got some comments about this on my Phase 2 video when I was talking about Subaru and Todd both being normal people. First things first, that comparison was always at least a little incorrect, okay? You guys were right, my bad. Subaru does indeed have authority, so he isn't exactly a normal person. They just aren't particularly outwardly powerful. Does that harm the dynamic much? No, not really. Okay, but seriously, Todd's a werewolf. A lot of people believe this means that he is no longer a normal person, and my question is why? In the world of ReZero, being a demi-human is quite literally a normal thing. They exist among humans every single day and in every area. Demi-humans were everywhere when Subaru first got isekai'd. A lot of main characters are demi-humans. We spent multiple books in a city filled with demi-humans. Todd being a werewolf does not make him exceptional, and treating him as such feels to be missing the point of the existence of demi-humans. Todd, despite being a werewolf, could barely, and I mean barely, overpower a literal 10-year-old with 3 arms. It allowed him to regenerate faster, but there are some concessions that are made when talking about a normal person in the ReZero world, and the fact that the condition of being abnormal is placed on Todd for not being a human, but not on Subaru for having the ability to return by death, shows the, to be frank, dishonesty of the argument. But that's enough about that silly criticism. Let's talk more about this Kino fight. One of my favorite things about the Subaru and Todd encounters is that almost every single time Todd runs into Subaru, he is in basically an entirely different identity, which I spoke about earlier, and I think it's super fitting for their fight to essentially end on the most extreme version of Subaru's ideas in the form of Natsuki Schwartz, a combination of both the intense feelings of having to prove himself as his father's son, hence the use of his actual last name, and Schwartz, the name of the false heroic identity he put on. The version of Subaru that feels like he can save every single person around him, forgive everyone for their wrongdoings and form connections with them, but in this identity, he runs into Todd Fang for the last time. No matter what Subaru does or says, Todd would rather kill him than lower his defenses. I mentioned this earlier, but you can't reach out to someone who wants to thrash and pull you down with them, because again, this entire conflict is simply Todd's projection of what he would do or his fears. Todd repeatedly claimed that they can't understand each other, but I honestly think that's bullshit. Subaru may not be able to fit perfectly into his shoes as a werewolf in Valencia, but Subaru can understand what it feels like to be persecuted, and the narration of the chapters makes it clear that it was something Subaru could grasp perfectly well. It isn't that Subaru couldn't understand Todd, it's that Todd refuses to hold any responsibility or take accountability for the things he has done, becoming a completely closed-off and tragic person because of his circumstances. This is indicated earlier in this phase when Todd's defense of his actions to Rem was that he was just following orders. Of course, just because Todd is a tragic story of a persecuted werewolf doesn't mean the things that he has done were acceptable, and the story understands this with Todd's perfect fourth-wall-breaking named chapter. A lot of named chapters are a way for us to dive into a character's backstory, to understand their goals, their motivations, their upbringing, and what led them to this place. Todd's named chapter is a rejection of this trope of ReZeros because we already know how we got to this place. We can fill in the blanks ourselves, and frankly, knowing the intricate details of Todd's life wouldn't change anything. From the man who wants nothing more than to be closed off and isolated, he has nothing to say to justify himself or his behavior, and the story has no interest in justifying his actions either, because a reason is not an excuse, it's just that, a reason. Nothing brought Todd to this encounter, these circumstances, or this position besides himself, and he looked to Subaru for validation of all of those decisions he made to justify his disposition towards others, but till the very end, Subaru refused to give him that. Todd is an unfortunate case of the kinds of walls one must put up to deal with rampant discrimination to the point that the nation has hunts, but even if that's true, he's still a bastard. Because of his upbringing, he would never be able to practice the vulnerability and compassion for others that Subaru has. The story of Todd Fang may be a tragic one, but that will not sway the narrative or Subaru himself to simply roll over for him. Emilia had decided to follow Cecilis, entrusting Madeline, who was frozen white, to a rebel, carefully examining the situation. All she could do was reflect on how, without Cecilis showing up, she would have been defeated. She climbed the tall city walls, looking down at the orderly and tidy layout of the city. The Emperor of the Empire had certainly had a clear vision for the future, endeavoring to make this city and country a better place. Even if you try so hard, this is how it turns out, huh? Regardless of what intentions the Emperor held when it came to governing the Empire, the answer that a part of the people of the Empire had come up with lay within this rebellion of theirs, a rebellion on whose side was Emilia as a supporter. While one could say it had happened gradually or as a result of circumstances, Emilia had not sided with them thoughtlessly. She had listened to them, discussed it with her comrades, and thus made the decision. Of course, she did not think it would be best to take the Emperor's life, as was the wish of many traitors, but rather to capture him and negotiate with Abel. In the far distance, she could see the battle between two titanic figures, and in the street, pale figures were attacking the fleeing people. The sensation that Emilia felt was not just a physical disgust, but it was probably her nature as a spiritual arts user that caused her to be repulsed by them. Spirits were natural entities that emerged into existence, desired by the world. On the other hand, what had caused her to shiver were unnatural entities, impure beings that the world did not recognize, a fact Emilia intuited as a spirit arts user. That moment, the significance of the battlefield changed within Emilia. She lifted both arms and created ice stairs haphazardly, within range of the star-shaped city wall surrounding the imperial capital. She turned the situation of being unable to enter or leave without passing through the gates into a situation where you could leave from any direction. Her missing endurance was made up for with determination, and Emilia cleared the streets of the whole area, guiding the people to the walls. She herself ran deeper into the city, her energy being noticeably drained after fighting Madeline, Mazoria, creating stairways, and now fighting the unnatural. She could make faster if she aimed straight for the Crystal Palace, but she had to protect the people who were being attacked by the unnatural along the way. Emilia saw another group of people hiding from the undead, and after turning them into frozen statues, she tells them that they could use the ice as a landmark to escape. Opening her eyes wide, in Emilia's field of view was a group of nearly 20 people who had slipped out from the other side of the street, most of them children of about 10, all of them having black hair. She blinks as an adult waves to her, telling her that she saved them. He turns and calls to two unfamiliar names, noticing one of the women in a wheelchair. Emilia was slightly surprised. Besides the one that Subaru made, this was the first that she had seen. A voice asks for Katya to not be angry. She understands her unease after being separated from her fiancé. Emilia, whose eyes had been fixed on the girl in the wheelchair, was slow to recognize the sight of the girl standing behind her that was pushing the wheelchair. Rem? Emilia stared fixedly at the face of the wide-eyed girl who was looking back at her. It was the first time she had seen her eyes open. Rem asks if she knows her, and Emilia gasped at that question from the girl with one hand on her chest, closing the distance between them, and took her hand. Rem's eyes widened at that moment. She teared up at the sight of Rem in front of her. Amazing. Rem's awake. This is huge. Quick, I have to let Rem and Subaru know. Rem asks who she is, but Emilia keeps raving. Rem wants to meet up outside, so she might be there already. Why is Subaru missing at a time like this? She stared angrily at Emilia, still clutching her hand. You also called me Rem. Are you someone who knew me from before? It's a bit tough to answer. I don't remember you from when you were awake, so it's weird, but it feels like we're meeting for the first time. Emilia felt sorry and thought about what to say to the puzzled Rem. She asks if she remembers nothing from before she woke up, and she confirms. Emilia had harbored a hope that perhaps, once Rem woke up, she would have the memories of her time with Emilia and the others, and she might be able to tell them about their previous relationships. Unfortunately, that hope was not realized, but still. You don't have anything to worry about. You may be really worried because you don't understand a lot of things, but I will help you, and Rem and Subaru will both be there for you. Rem asks what she is to her, and Emilia says it's like a guest or a maid, but that isn't all that Rem is to her, so she wants to have more than that with Rem as well. Lending each other help when they need it, thinking together when they have problems, and facing difficult things side by side. Maybe I can't explain this kind of relationship very well, Emilia mutters. Flap says that he has a feeling that she is on her side. He has met many people as a merchant, but it's rare to meet someone so straightforward. She can be trusted. Rem hesitates, narrowing her eyes. You mentioned the name Subaru earlier, Emilia confirms. Subaru is someone who really worries about you and has always treasured you. In response, Rem lowered her eyes. If that is true, with a look of concern, Emilia interjects. Were you with Subaru? And if you were, was he doing anything reckless? So, that's your perception too. That man is often reckless. Yeah, he's a difficult boy, and oh, come to think of it, my name's Emilia. Just Emilia. I should start by introducing myself, since you've forgotten. Rem mutters her name for the first time, and the two determine that, since Subaru is out being reckless again, they have to get to him. Suddenly, a rather loud explosion echoed in the distance. Katya's shoulders jumped at the sound, looking around restlessly. Emilia could see a red pillar of fire rising from the far side of the imperial capital, followed by a plume of black smoke. The second Emilia saw that explosion, she knew that Subaru had something to do with it. Emilia picked up Rem, leaving her dumbfounded by her strength. With Rem and a princess carry, she left from that spot and ascended to the rooftops. She started running again deep into the imperial capital. With Rem in her arms, she ran and ran and ran, with the feeling of Rem's arms clinging tightly to her, and then, at that moment, the reunion had been made complete. Withdrawal from the imperial capital. Although it had been concluded to be a decision necessary, it was still a major incident in the history of the Empire. Gauze, Olbart, and Ubilk squabble about the prospect of fleeing. However, those who oppose his decision, at that moment, amounted to none. Vincent tells Olbart to buy us some time. If left alone, Moguro Hagane will be defeated quickly. We cannot let the reservoir be destroyed yet. He tells Gauze to make use of his absurd volume. Ubilk asks if there is anything they should do, saying there are 27 of them. Vincent tells them to go around opening doors in the residences one by one, tell them that the Emperor and the troops will abandon the capital. He then looked at Burstets, who remained silent so as not to disturb his thoughts and deliberations. You are rather quiet, Vincent points out. In the present situation, two heads giving commands can only sow seeds of confusion. If, hypothetically, a sword wolf were born with two heads, it would mean that severing one of the two heads is your duty, Vincent replies. If so needed, this old man shall offer you his head with pleasure. Burstets calmly stated with resolve. Plain and simple, a devout devotion to the Empire was Burstets' driving force. For that reason, upon witnessing a threat to the Empire, he would immediately drop his previous plans and ideas, and stand on the same side as Vincent, as he was doing now, without hesitation. When Gauze, the Stargazer, and the others finish their preparations, we shall begin our withdrawal. Burstets, your opinion, be brief. With all due respect, Your Excellency, if you are going to withdraw, please follow your own thoughts. Although his words were enigmatic, Burstets did not mean to mislead Vincent. After a moment of contemplation, Vincent understood the meaning of those words. To follow his own thoughts, that was to say, the thoughts of Vincent Valekia. That was the same mindset that Chisha Gold had been following up until now. If Chisha had replaced you knowing what had been predicted, cooperating with me to usurp the throne, he must have guessed what the great disaster would consist of and made provisions. Chisha had staked his life to remain in the form of Vincent on the throne, and what if he had left Vincent with more than just a future where he was supposed to have been cut off? We are withdrawing from the imperial capital. We are heading northwest to the fortified city of Garkla. If Chisha Gold had truly embodied Vincent Valekia, then a plan to oppose the great disaster should be present in that place. Such was what he loudly declared. The Spirit Eater Arakia, protecting the first bastion, was being confronted by Priscilla Burial and Yorna Mashigare. As the world was dominated by red, radiant flames, Yorna gallantly kicked the ground with a fire lit in one of her eyes. When one of her legs touched the ground, the earth rose the next moment and aided her sprint in both speed and momentum. This was not the demon city of Chaos Flame, but only the land surrounding the imperial capital. Long ago, beyond the memories of a past that had become distant, she had once desired for the imperial capital that seemed so out of her reach. Though it had been a place that she could never reach through her own strength, as she held hands with a man who was so noble and of such different status that she was afraid to whisper that she loved him, there she stood. Yorna's soul marriage could only be granted to those she loved. Then, with love for that man, with love that can never fade, why did Yorna not love the very land that she loved? She had sheltered, supported, and walked the same path as the Emperor who had been ousted from the throne. Seeing the courage and nobleness of the young girl, many had sung the praises of the King of Thorns, wishing blessings upon their future together. However, due to the mole people who had tricked them by manipulating them with adulation, and the wolf people who had betrayed them through ambition and arrogance, that future had lost its perfect ending. The paradise that the King of Thorns was supposed to build, the construction of that promised world, was abandoned. The Emperor, controlled by delusion, bound the soul of the girl, a soul supposed to disappear, with the blood of the traitors, to the soil of the Empire. Since then, Iris had been reborn again and again, changing her name and appearance. Loving someone, being loved by someone, she continued to live. But at the same time, this Valakian Empire, the Empire's very land, was the only thing that she could not love. Perhaps she hated it because it was so distant from the dream she had once envisioned. But, however, such things were trivial compared to what was truly important. Whether or not she could love, she just decided to love. It was not an empire with only happy memories. Happiness and unhappiness had been two sides of the same coin, both when she had been Iris and throughout her many lifetimes after she had ceased to be Iris. The same was true for Yorna's beloved children in the Demon City. Sometimes she would be choked up with love, and sometimes she would be angry at their pettiness. All of it I'm happy with. Yes, as the resounding love resonated with Yorna, the burning earth rejoiced. Even though Yorna and Roswell have never had an interaction on screen unless I'm forgetting something, they serve as super interesting foils to each other in their reincarnation experiences. While Roswell is a man who, through repeated reincarnations, has fixated on the prospect of giving up those lives in pursuit of a single, solitary goal or person, everything else be damned, but Yorna is an inversion of a similar circumstance. While Roswell tried his best to not form human connections, Yorna clung to all of them throughout her many lives. All of that love has carried over through all of her incarnations, and Roswell's self-isolating tendencies are what ultimately led to his fall, while Yorna's extreme power comes from the love she has garnered. I also really like the different concepts of love that ReZero has, with Yorna's complicated relationship with Valekia being another that we've now introduced, and even sometimes complicated feelings with the Demon City. Of course she loves them, but love can be a complicated feeling, and it was a cool thing captured here. The solid ground, which was only supposed to catch her footsteps, gleefully lashed out, and the bouncing earth served as a foothold for Yorna, sending her high into the sky. Spinning around, her thick-soled heels fell on Arakia in midair. She had attempted to let it pass through her, however, Yorna's kick exploded on her skin that it was supposed to have slipped through. The shoulder that had been kicked burst with pain, and Arakia gave a small gasp at that impossible impact. Yorna was not surprised, nor satisfied, however. She raised her upper body and swung the Kisuru held by her slender fingers, unleashing a follow-up attack. There was a sound of something hard hitting her flesh consecutively, and Arakia's expression was distorted again and again. Her voice escaped from her throat as if she could not comprehend the sensations she was suffering. It was a matter of rejecting the fact behind it. Why, she asked Yorna. Her eyes were widened, even the one eye she could no longer see from. If there is love there, then there's no meaning in tactless hesitation, she responds. And to that Arakia can only mutter, love? You're the only foster sister of my ill-disciplined daughter, are you not? Yorna's answer, with a beaming smile, filled Arakia's face with a look of incomprehension. Her cheeks hardened at the fact that she did not understand it. Arakia freely flew into the sky at high speed to escape, causing cataclysmic waves of natural phenomena. Yorna, being airborne, had no way to avoid her onslaught of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. As was the case even before I made peace with the Empire, Yorna quietly said to herself. She ran through the air on the footholds of earth that rose one after another. While resentful in spirit, but also full of joyful emotional attachment, were she to decide to love the Valachian Empire in its state, in its entirety, then the ground itself would respond and continue its ardent support. Arakia assimilated with the spirits in the atmosphere, thus becoming transparent to enemy attacks. Since she had become overly accustomed to dodging in that manner, Arakia was slow to react to the approaching danger posed by Yorna, taking a kick directly to the torso. Finally, pain was etched onto her face. This was definitely a sign that Yorna's attack was pushing Arakia over the edge. She grabbed her tree branch and slammed it into Yorna, screaming that she would never. Yorna caught the branch with her Kisuru, her mouth quivering slightly. Her soul marriage technique could transfer pain and wounds to her own belongings. Naturally, this was a secret technique that required an appropriate level of attachment and dedication. However, her kenzashi, earrings, and obidome, all of which had been donated by her beloved residents of the Demon City, were not consumed. In spite of this, Yorna herself was suffering pain. The answer was simple and clear. Love was never a one-way affair. Once she had decided to love the Empire in an intermingling of love and hate, once she had as well decided to discipline Arakia, with whom she had fallen into a hostile relationship, she needed to aim for compatibility instead of forcing one-sided love on her. This was the exact opposite of how Yorna Mishigura's soul marriage technique had been intended to be used originally. Priscilla, holding the dazzling Yang sword in her hand, frowned at the sight of her mother and foster sister clashing without restraint. As a user of the forbidden soul marriage technique, Priscilla understood the forbidden nature of what Yorna was doing, focusing only on the strength of the technique without regard for its weakness. You, too, are reckless, dear mother. Yorna had figured out with only a glance how to ignore Arakia's nature as a spirit eater and let her attacks flow through, but it required a precise handling of magic and the resolve to suffer wounds herself. Both Priscilla and Yorna were no strangers to the technique, a secret art that required a talent so rare it had no historical inheritors and required a miraculous sense of balance to put it into practice. In short, Yorna's efforts were a risky gamble that would not only prevent Arakia's attacks from reaching her, but could even sever her connection with the loved ones who had given her gifts. For the sake of Priscilla, Yorna had embraced that taboo, in order to avoid a situation in which Priscilla would have to kill Arakia. To cut what one wanted to cut, and to burn what one wanted to burn, was the true essence of the Yang Sword's properties. In a demonstration of its true value, its white flame could deliver Priscilla's slashes without regard to Arakia's characteristics, even if Arakia had all natural phenomena as her ally. While maintaining the effect of the soul marriage technique, the attacker was able to reach their opponent. This was exactly what had happened at the time Priscilla and Arakia had met again for the first time in nearly a decade, and under those circumstances, Priscilla could obviously not entertain the notion of doing the same thing. Reflecting upon her feelings, she realized that before Yorna had struck her on the head with her Kisuru, Priscilla had been uncharacteristically enthusiastic. Upon arriving at this point, she felt that she had to deal with Arakia herself. However, a spirit eater's karma, is it? To wield great power, one must pay the appropriate price. Not to mention Priscilla's Yang Sword or soul marriage technique, the same was true of Arakia's spirit-eating powers. Of course, she had heard of what kind of being Arakia was born to be back when the latter had accompanied her. She had done her own research, even. However, she had not been careful enough. The result of that had bestowed the pillar called Priscilla upon Arakia, one who could not stand without support. Vincent had intended to fight something very different, something much greater than a rebellion. Moreover, he had no intention of surviving at the end of the battle. When the battle was over, to whom would he intend to entrust the throne he had lost? Arakia's loyalty could not change to someone else. Just about everything had been first fabricated as a board atop the desk, and the world that had been constructed in reality according to that board, that was Vincent's strength. But no matter how good his wits were, if his envisioned form of perfection was mistaken, the world as he envisioned it would be undeniably distorted. He would one day be rewarded for his lack of awareness, or maybe he would receive it in this battle. However, we have been apart 10 years, older brother. You shall distance yourself from your little sister. The sky was dyed red with flames, and the earth was raging at the behest of the flamboyant. It was as if heaven and earth were all refusing the intervention of the sun. However, to such a presumptuous world, Priscilla Beriel, or rather, the girl formerly known as Prissa Benedict, had only one thing to say. Everything in this world is made for my convenience. At that moment, it was wrong to express what Arakia was feeling as humiliation or shame. Humiliation meant that there had to be no name for the feeling of being lowered by regret. Shame meant that there could be no sense of pride in being disgraced by falling behind. Arakia had no attachment to her name or pride of any kind. Despite being blessed with the status and abilities that many people desperately desired, those things could not become the pillar that supported her. Arakia defined herself as a beast in the wild. Beasts that lived by hunting other creatures had no pride in their fangs or claws. Arakia only thought so, but beasts did have their own pride and way of doing things. That being the case, Arakia's self-perception was far from even that of a beast. Fire, wind, water, earth, light, and shadow, untouchable phenomena. There was no will that intervened, only the realization of what was desired. Arakia wanted to be a phenomenon, neither man nor beast. She wanted to be a phenomenon that did not feel humiliated or disgraced. If so, she attempted to turn into the wind to deal with the barrage of fierce attacks, however, she was unable to handle it completely. The wind was seized, and the blows left a pain and heaviness inside of Arakia. As a spirit eater, she did not often experience pain in battle, but she was by no means immune to it. She had experienced all kinds of pain as a child. In order to obtain the qualities of a spirit eater, the adults around Arakia had attempted every conceivable ritual and technique, repeating them over and over again. She was not afraid of pain. She would not cower in remembering the past. However, the mere fact of being realized was greater than the pain of Arakia. Fire would not suffer pain, nor would it die if it was extinguished by water. Was Arakia nothing more than a fire that would suffer pain and die when extinguished? Arakia was afraid of denying to herself that she could not be a phenomenon. That's when a slap from her opponent landed across her face. It was neither humiliation nor disgrace, but a seeming denial of her existence. As if clinging on for dear life, Arakia raised the group, with her palm toward Yorna, who leapt onto her. She did not know what was happening, but both Prissa and Yorna managed to escape Arakia's attacks at some point. Just one time. One shot, one hit. If only she could get rid of that annoying Yorna, she would be left alone with just Prissa and herself. If there's something you want, it's more constructive to go out and get it than to wait, right? Yes, Todd had said that. For some reason, those words resonate strongly in Arakia's mind. Todd's words were devoid of any emotion towards her, and that was comforting. Just as one did not love fire or water, Todd had no feelings towards Arakia. Being treated so vacuously was Arakia's salvation. The tree branch in her hand burst into flames from tip to tail, turning into black dust. The branch was just something she had picked up. It had no special power. It was merely a clear indicator that defined where Arakia intended to direct her power. The Spirit Eater, Arakia, was regarded as one of the Empire's strongest, and her greatest power had been unleashed only a single time, during a skirmish with Cecile's segment. Because it was Cecile's, no damage was done to him, but Arakia's rampage had left the northern part of the capital a burnt wasteland. Vincent had told Arakia that it would not be tolerated a second time. Second, at Chish's suggestion, the burnt land was reused as a reservoir, but the blow had been powerful enough to redraw the map. Everything in the world is made for my convenience. The slash issued by a dignified and confident voice drowned everything out. A flash of the Yang sword swallowed the flames that would have scorched the world black. Prissa then raised the Yang sword in her hand, and with a flash, Arakia's movements were sealed off. Her consciousness was cut off. At the very end, she finally now heard it. My Yang sword cuts what I want to cut, burns what I want to burn, and strikes what I want to strike. While Arakia fell, she had not realized it had not been the sword's blade, but rather the hilt that had been pointed towards her. It's very clear at this point that Arakia can also be included in the ever-expanding list of characters that have a staggering lack of self-worth. She finds her worth and value to be placed only in what essentially amounts to Priscilla's ownership over her. Arakia herself isn't exactly suicidal in this encounter per se, but something even beyond that. She doesn't want to die, she just doesn't want to even exist, to be perceived whatsoever, to only amount to merely a phenomenon, and views her existence as one not worthy of other people's emotion. I think with this fight, we can kind of paint the overall picture of Arc 8 here. With Amelia versus Madeline, Subaru versus Todd, and Priscilla versus Arakia, the zombies rising all around the nation and more, I think it's safe to assume that Arc 8 is purely about accepting loss. I touched on this back in my Phase 7 video, but Amelia and Madeline felt particularly coded to be about Madeline not being able to accept what is gone. Of course, Balroy then comes back in the next phase, but it certainly leaves us with some questions. With all these fights going on in Phase 1 relating to circumstances that won't exist anymore, like Balroy's relationship with Madeline, or Arakia's relationship with Priscilla, or Subaru's relationship with Todd, and with Subaru's clearly ending in the defeat of Todd, it seems like these central conflicts will all conclude with them accepting their circumstances. Balroy is merely a shambling recreation of the man that once was, Arakia and Priscilla have drifted apart in separate life directions, and Todd and Subaru could, quote, never understand each other, unquote. With zombies rising up all around the nation attempting to squash their final beefs, this feels like an extremely fitting point to Arc 8. The boy smiled. No matter the time, he was always smiling. Had he gone crazy? Yeah, he was crazy. Had he been drunk? Yeah, he was drunk. Not on battle, not on alcohol, not on love, not on blood. Absolutely, thoroughly, unquestionably a maniac. Undoubtedly, unequivocally a drunkard. That boy continued to smile. If he did not do so, folks who are busy wouldn't perch their eyes on the stage of a boring actor now, would they? Smiling would signify that a tale was beginning to unfold. Whether that tale had already begun, or was just beginning from here, he did not know. By all means, feel free to smile. How about it? You've gone through great trouble to get everything fully prepared up to this point. If possible, showering you with loud laughter would feel just as good as defeating you. Oh, is it possible that it's strange for me to be here? If you perhaps think that one of your allies disobeyed you and spoke about it or something, that would be a needless worry. I don't really know why, but I just came all the way here on a hunch after all. The bulwark of the reservoir behind him had been fissured, water continuing to gush out, and standing in front of it, blocking the way, the boy, Cecilia Segment, saw the figure of an antagonist before his eyes. Whatever shall I do with you? How arduous. Deliberation required. Subaru's eyelids trembled, and a weak sigh leaked from his throat. He slowly awoke from the darkness. What came into his view was an unfamiliar ceiling. A familiar, lovely face filled Subaru's view as Beatrice calls him a hopeless oversleeper. He can only chuckle at her pouting face as he inquires about his surroundings, and Betty tells him to calm down and take a look around him. Resting on his bed all around him, he saw many people snoring. Tanza, Garfield, the Gladiator Trio, Luis, Yutakata, and even Petra were all in the same room. Everyone had come to hold Subaru's hand, and he mutters how stupid that is, but Beatrice quietly tells him that it's not. We were all worried about you. If holding your hand would help you, then even if it's just that, we're ready to do anything, in fact. Subaru should be more aware of how important his presence is, even if it's just a little, I suppose. That's what Betty has been telling you over and over again, in fact. Sinking his shoulders a bit, Subaru can't help but feel that everyone has become too overprotective of him because he shrank, but just 1 second afterwards, his shoulders would jump up due to the voice poking in. I don't know about that. For me, rather than overprotectiveness of those around him, should you not first reflect on his own shrinkage, Natsuki? Subaru couldn't help but think that his soft features were ever so great to see as Otto Suin stands in the door. He tells Subaru that he will alert the others that he has awoken, but before things become too noisy, he would like to raise a personal complaint, touching his hatless head. He tells Otto that his mentality has been trained here, and he can't destroy him with half-baked words. Otto responds that he does not intend on giving him a long lecture, since he is not the only one who wants to speak to him, so he'll keep it short. I am glad that you were able to safely reunite with us. Please, do not worry too much. A hand reached out, plopping itself onto Subaru's small shoulder. Feeling Otto's fingers, which were stronger than the impression given by his features, with them trembling slightly on top of his shoulder, Subaru then choked up. Firmly, Otto knitted his brows, his nose wrinkling as he let those words out. As he had always been one to look at himself from an unbiased view, Otto's uncontainable emotions became loosened. Those words that Otto had let out had been a killing blow, mercilessly destroying Natsuki Subaru's barriers, driving a fatal blow into the bare soul beneath. Oh, I've lost. It's a complete loss. Otto, you bastard. While his face was still red, Subaru had a wicked smile as he declared defeat in a loud voice, and Otto's face turned pale as he shouted. At that, with Subaru and Otto's back-and-forth argument echoing within the confines of the cabin, naturally, one by one his sleeping companions heard them and began to wake up. And like that, with joy and reproach, there was an eruption of feelings of joy and sorrow. The simultaneous evacuation of the citizens from the Imperial capital. That was a matter of great importance that had been conducted while Subaru was unconscious. Subaru had woken up in the cabin of a dragon carriage allocated to the transportation of important individuals, among the large groups who had undertaken that action. Subaru apologizes to the Gladiator trio because his passing out likely undid the strength buff. Whites tells him it's fine though, as it happened during the evacuation. Subaru notices something is wrong with Tanza, but she has no intention of talking about it right now, as she exits the cabin along with everyone else. Then, a lively voice tenderly struck his eardrums. Just by calling her name out, his heart experienced a sweet, tingling sensation. Emilia smiled softly, and she's relieved to see that he has made so many friends. They were all really worried about you and never left your side, she tells him. At her words, he lowered his head. No matter how strong Subaru's feelings about causing them all worried had been, whenever he was told it was a bad habit of his, he felt bad about it, but I'm such a lucky guy, he mutters out loud. Emilia tells him that's true, but she wants Subaru to be more and more happy, so this tiny amount is not enough at all. He tilts his head at her in a playful manner. Even after all the good you've done for me, he asks. So, when you do something for me, do you ever feel satisfied and that it's enough, Subaru? He was at a loss for words. She was right. When he wanted to do something for the people he loved, he never thought if what he was doing was enough, but rather, he thought if there was more that he could do. She giggled at his puzzled face and asked him what he thought. I'm not wrong, am I, my knight? Softening his eyes, he can't help but admire how far she had come. You've grown so much while I've been away, and I'm so proud of you. But I've missed you, Emilia. Just Emilia? She asks. No, it's Emilia Tan. When asked again, Subaru recalled the long-forgotten name he called her. That was what Subaru had called the girl who was so important, so precious, so dear, and that got his heart all messed up when he thought about her. As soon as he called her by that name, a feeling of harmony overcame him. The mood, however, was interrupted by Petra and Garfield demanding to speak with Subaru. Frederico even tears up at seeing him. Subaru thanks everyone, and Garfield rubs the bridge of his nose, saying that without the captain, we can't get our amazing selves together in any way. Petra is surprised he became so tiny. Certainly, this cannot be said to be over with just all of them coming together, at least not with Subaru's current condition. As expected, they did not intend to return to the kingdom with Subaru in a shrunken state. Natsuki Subaru would not be able to stand alongside Emilia unless he returned to his original age of 18. Subaru asks Beatrice if she minds him lining up next to her, and she says no, but Big Subaru is preferable for being held in his arms. Subaru could feel the nostalgia of the long-separated Emilia camp in this gentle, indescribable atmosphere, and his soul found a sense of satisfaction. While everyone he met here was precious, the preciousness of this space, which had been kept away from him for so long, was something he took the time to appreciate. But as expected, guess Roswell or Ram couldn't come, he said, giving a wry smile. Melee was also not there, but it would be difficult for her to cross the border. Emilia corrects him. Roswell and Ram are here, and his thoughts are shattered. The presence of Roswell was a tremendous surprise, but this was put aside for now, because the problem was not Roswell. Ram is here too? Did she already meet with Rem? As soon as Subaru asked that question, everyone's expression, except for Subaru's, suddenly became tense. That reaction was what Subaru had feared the most. Their reactions were of the I forgot to tell Subaru variety, which told him it had happened while he was sleeping. Right in front of her, from behind the door she was about to reach, she heard a powerful, loud shout. The bellowing voice and its contents stopped Rem from moving, and her mind was racked with hesitation. Her shapely eyebrows furrowing together, wondering what to do. Right beside Rem, Luis, hugging her around the waist, looked up at her curiously. She apologized to the girl. She knows she wants to see him. They're not bad people at all, I know that. According to what she had heard, they hailed from the kingdom neighboring the Empire, even though crossing over was forbidden, going as far as to participate in a civil war which they had no connection. All of this had been performed to save Subaru, or rather, to save Subaru and Rem. In the same way that Rem could also not escape from this struggle in the Empire, you can hear Barusu's rapacious voice. Rem gasped slightly. Instead of Rem, it was Luis who turned around to look at the other party. Stop glaring at Ram with such an accusatory look. This was a tough love lesson for Barusu. No, there's no love, so it's just tough. Purely a tough lesson. Rem, without looking, asks if she doesn't like him. Ram replies that there's no hate, just many opportunities for disdain. With that said, Rem also turned to the other party who was slowly walking towards her, their shoes making a sound. She took a beat to turn around and look in that direction, as she needed to muster up the courage to look at that other person's face directly. Meeting face to face, Rem can only mutter the name of the one standing before her. What a cold way to address Ram, considering she's ready to be called older sister. Furrowing her brows, she says that everything was just so sudden. The woman who stood in front of her, clutching her elbows and puffing at her chest, Ram, which was how she referred to herself, which was how she was referred to by those around her, bore a lot of resemblance to Ram herself. The color of her hair and eyes, and the overwhelming presence of confidence overflowing within them, marked the differences between her and Rem. Whatever you think, Rem's heart will feel it, because Ram and Rem are sisters. Synesthesia does not lie. A sort of connection of the soul between twins. All along, Ram has felt Rem's presence. Is Rem different? Rem closed her lips at Ram, who narrowed her light crimson eyes as she asked directly. If asked whether Rem was different or not, then no, not at all. While she did not understand well that thing called synesthesia, inside Rem there was a very, very strong sensation that felt different. That was an overwhelming feeling of safety towards Ram, whom she was supposedly meeting for the first time. But I am afraid to have such feelings about you, with whom I have only exchanged a few words in a short time. For Rem, who had lost her memory, Subaru and Louise were the only two people who were present at the moment her present self began. Due to the circumstances, she had pushed Subaru away and kept Louise by her side at first. After that, Rem got to know the Shadrakians, got to know Flop and Medium, got to know Priscilla and Katya, and in Rem's own way, she established various relationships with them. Even then, Ram's very existence overtook all of them at once, attempting to stand on top. That is what I'm afraid of. This inexpressible sense of security. It was the footsteps of the past approaching. It was not that she did not wish to regain her lost memories, but it also seemed as though many of Rem's problems would surely come back to her with those memories return. But at the same time, she feared that when those footsteps caught up with her, everything would change. If the way one saw, the way one felt, the way one thought, if everything changed, yes, firmly, intensely, Rem shut her eyes and clutched her chest. And there, yes, what a relief. Ram, who was clutching her elbows, stared at her, lowering the corners of her eyes slightly, wondering what she had just said. Ram is thinking the same as Rem, afraid. As she had a tender expression, but spoke about fear, Ram began to understand less how Ram in front of her felt. No, that was not it. Understanding that she did not understand, that was what confused her. Louise groaned as she hugged her around the waist, sensitive to Rem's quaking heart, sharpening her gaze as if to scold Ram for causing it. Trying to stand between Rem and Ram, of all people, you? Just what history was there between them, for Ram to have stated as such while displaying signs that she also knew Louise, then looking into Rem's eyes once again. When their eyes met, she could not separate them from hers. Even though her heart felt like being burned by the intensity of that gaze, her soul was attracted to it. Her anxiety grew stronger and stronger, just as equally strong as her captivation towards Ram. Feeling it intensely, Rem bit her lip hard. You certainly must be my older sister. I can believe that without a doubt. It's just... Even if your heart is convinced, your mind is not? Yes, right. Then that is fine for now. Rem nodded weakly, and Ram closed the distance with another step. The former's shoulders tensed at the sight of her approaching, and Louise stepped forward to protect her, but Rem gently held Louise's shoulder with an "it's okay," stopping the gentle girl. Then, of their own volition, they directed their gazes directly at Ram. With Rem's gaze on her, Ram uncrossed her arms and held out her hand. The hand that was offered by the person whose heart had already recognized her as her sister. I am Ram, your older sister, doubtlessly born to love you, though there are other people just as important to this independent older sister of yours too. Rem's eyes widened. Then, as the meaning of the words began to sink in, a gasp escaped her lips. Rem just gave a little smile and laughed. It turns out you are a frightening person. When I talk to you, I feel like my body just surrenders itself into this sense of security I feel. It cannot be helped. Ram is the kind of older sister you just want to put all your trust and love into. Mustering up the courage, Ram refers to her as sister. Ram raised her eyebrows slightly. As much as doing it like Barusu said annoys me, this sure doesn't feel comfortable, Ne-sama. With Ram looking sour for an instant then continuing her words, Rem widened her eyes. In response to Rem's reaction, Ram repeated herself once more, saying the same thing. Address Ram with Ne-sama. That feels the most comfortable. Ram Ne-sama? The name is unnecessary. Then she pulled Rem's hand, the one she was gripping, towards herself. Rem stumbled around a bit on reflex, but came to have Ram gently catch her body from the front. And in continuing like that, Ram put her lips to Rem's ear and said that she can clearly feel it. Ram is Rem's Ne-sama. Thus, as soon as she was embraced by her arms, what she had been afraid of overflowed from her. What she had dubbed a sense of security was an attraction to her soul, a love for Ram. Firmly, gently, it engulfed even Rem, who was supposedly without memories, as much as it pains Ram to say it. But are you ready for this, Rem? To go inside, we need to show it to Barusu, not to mention show it off to Emilia and the others. We need to boast our sisterly love. That will alleviate any lingering worries. Rem closed her eyes. Even now, be it Emilia and everyone else, or Subaru as well, how she ought to face them and what expression she should have were questions for which she had not found an answer. But at the very least, there were no doubts whatsoever about the feeling of Ram being her sister, about her feelings for Ram. With Louise in tow, Ram mustered up the courage to line up next to her sister, who had turned around halfway. Without stopping, Ram and her shared glances and nodded, and the two of them reached for the door before them and... Pardon us, I could hear you making a lot of noise even from the outside. It was a very Barusu-like yell, like many little animals put together, wasn't it? And so, The sisters both stepped into the cabin their companions were in. Subaru mutters that it feels like a huge weight has been lifted, now that he is no longer alone in protecting Rem. However, upon hearing he was not present for the reunion of the sisters, he had been struck with grief akin to the world ending. Finally, he had made it so that Rem and Ram could meet. Just how much of that could be said to be due to Subaru's contributions, he did not know, but it had been done regardless. That Subaru himself had also been able to meet up with Amelia and the gang was a matter of great celebration. Although, I'm still small, and Rem's memories aren't back yet. However, he could sense that the seeds of hope were budding. As far as the matter of Subaru's size went, it could be said that a way for it to be resolved could be seen in the near future, and assuredly, he would be able to find a way to restore Rem's memories. So what came next was, is it really okay if you don't have Betty with you? No, I'm not that composed at all, but he won't show his face with you around, so indulge my selfishness. She tenderly detached her hand, and Subaru was left with nobody else in the cabin filled with silence. He was instantly overwhelmed with a myriad of misgivings. There was the sound of shoes stepping firmly, leisurely, on the floor in a dignified manner, punctuated by a posture which lacked any hesitation to make their presence known to those in the environs. Their deportment, the keen glint in their eyes, none of it deviated from his memory. And yet, they were markedly different in some way. That person, that black-haired man, Subaru fixedly stared at his handsome looks. How eloquently shall you speak, Natsuki Subaru, O stargazer of the Dragon Kingdom? And thus, his black eyes filled with hostility, Vincent Valakia inquired so of Natsuki Subaru. Before we jump into this part, I have a few things to say. Firstly, this was around the time where I got kind of confused by the endgame of Kid Subaru. It's not that I dislike it, in fact, I think it's had some of his most interesting development thus far, but when you zoom out and view it as a whole, as of Arc 8 Phase 1, Subaru's been a kid for 6 entire volumes, which is over twice as long as Subaru from Arc 6, and also like 17% of ReZero in total. And I was sitting here wondering why it's still ongoing, and if it's going to continue to go on, there's hopefully some good payoff for it. Also, the narration said that he wants to return to being 18, but shouldn't he be 19 by now? He was almost 18 in Arc 1, and over a year has happened since then, so shouldn't he be 19? Like, almost maybe halfway pushing to 20? I'm assuming the main thing people are wanting to hear me talk about is the Ram and Rem reunion, or the initial one being off-screen. I will be honest, I don't really care. I could definitely understand the possible frustration of having their first meeting together, not on screen, but the fact that it was off-screened, and the narration stating that they only had exchanged a couple of words, generally tells me that their first meeting wasn't particularly special, and the one we got instead is what we were supposed to see, a deeply emotional, personal, and vulnerable encounter. Rem and Amelia, or Rem and Ram sharing a scene together again, feels insane, because it has been literal real-life years since their last on-screen appearance without Rem being asleep, of course. I think Rem's fear of the past is really interesting, as she doesn't know what to expect, and she doesn't know what in the past makes Rem Rem. And that could be a frightening experience, as you get tossed into an entire group of people that all have their expectations of you set by someone else. In Valakia, for better or for worse, she has formed all these new connections that she has investment in, and she cannot but wonder if it's unfair for all these people to suddenly barge back into her life, when she has these people she knows here. And justifiably, Ram holds on to that same fear because this isn't the Ram she supposedly spent her life with. Having this overwhelming, natural feeling towards someone that you trust, that you just don't know, that has to be a frightening experience. And these are two people that technically don't know each other whatsoever, besides that innate trust, but they are their own people with their own experiences, relationships, and memories. But at the end of the day, their souls can't lie to each other. I think this was a super good reunion scene, and I'm excited to see how Rem and Ram's new relationship forms, just like Rem and Subaru's. Also, for anyone curious, I usually localize stuff like Ne-sama, but I kept it in this because, while I don't speak Japanese, I was told by people who do that is a very important distinction for the scene, so I kept it in. Anyway, gonna stop yapping again because it's time for peak. Rolling back the clock a bit, Vincent turned to face Rem. He batted one eye shut at her question. Are you going to see him? Have the uninvited guests from the kingdom achieved their purpose? Their purpose is not me, but cease. Do not take up my time with nonsense that even you do not fully believe. Time is precious, especially under the current circumstances. At the sound of Vincent's sharp voice, the girl lowered her head with eyes downcast. However, she quickly raised it again, adopting his notion of limited time. Are you going to see him, Abel? She asks again. I am not Abel. I am Vincent Valakia, a temporary name that he borrowed from his family name, Abelux, a name he held no particular attachment to. But his displeasure towards being called that was stronger right now. It has been reported that that thing is awake. I must confront him. Whatever she thought, it would not alter Vincent's decision. He did not think that she had such thoughts or intentions to begin with. Protected, displaced, distressed, and after such a long period of time, she would come to a natural conclusion. Like many others, she was merely a single, ordinary person. Ergo, Vincent attempted to cut that dialogue short. However, he is not your enemy, Abel. The girl thus glared at Vincent, her pale blue eyes containing a definite purpose. There was a light that, as of their parting, had not dwelled in them. Timidly yet boldly it penetrated Vincent, as if trying to intimidate him. I am Vincent Valekia. There shall not be a third time. I'm sorry, but I do not have my memories, so I don't know much about Emperor Vincent, so there's nothing I could say to him. He is not your enemy, Abel. Without once averting her gaze, the girl yet again emphasized so. Vincent had a good understanding of her based on the ability she possessed. She was the reins with which to control Natsuki Subaru and a valuable user of healing magic. Supposing that she had taken that self-assured stance against Vincent while being aware of her own position, he would be compelled to do nothing but dub her as possessing considerable metal, yet that did not seem to be the case. What did you say your name was? It's Rem. At least now I can definitively answer that. The girl who has no memories making such a declaration. It's strange, even though my heart and mind don't remember, there are things that your surroundings can teach you. I know that I'm Rem, thanks to someone who kept telling me this all the time. Rem, never again let mine time be so needlessly squandered. At your next act of disrespect, I shall lop off your head. Leaving her with those words, he ended his conversation with Rem, and entered the room with Natsuki Subaru. It's an honor to have Vincent Valekia come and visit me. You arrived at just the right time. Can you peel me an appa? Do not play games with me. In the first place, I am not the one to do the likes of peeling fruit. Where are the appas even? Subaru's gaze turned to the side. Even in another world, it was standard practice for fruit to be brought when visiting someone injured or ill. It was perhaps a bit of a cliché in situations of the sort. For that reason, there was a basket of appas next to his bed. In that basket of fruits here, the red ones, don't they look delicious or what? Fool, are you duping me? Appas are fruit of white color. Well, they're white once you've peeled them, but wait, this conversation, I think I recall having this very exchange, stored in the recesses of my mind. I guess there are things you don't know either. How unexpected. With the not at all tense preface to their first mutual exchange of words in a while, feeling like they had not started off badly, Subaru stated so. At Subaru's words, the man, Abel, extended a hand to the basket and split an appa in half with the knife he left there. Laying eyes upon that undeniable result, did he have the mind to admit what was actually factual in their previous exchange? Abel put down the knife and, leaving the fruit split open in the basket, turned to Subaru. Moistening those sable eyes of his still was unmistakable hostility. No way. You're mad at me for embarrassing you about the color of an appa? You're the one who's called me something weird just now. Stargazer of the Dragon Kingdom it was? Subaru frowned. He had no idea what he was on about. The term was not one he had no recollection of. If he was not mistaken for what he had heard, it was something like a term that referred to the fortune tellers that accompanied the Emperor closely, very much like the Dragon History Stone, the Kingdom of Lagunica's Tablet of Prophecies. They were in existence that spoke of the future. No, feels like you spoke of it in a way even worse than that. You put it like it's peeping into the near future. I recognize it as such without a doubt. That is how I perceive those things. If that's the case, you spoke of me as if I'm a peeping Tom just now. Are you aware of that? Just how much have you grasped about the current situation? I wasn't told many of the details. Amelia and everyone were all worried about me after I woke up, but I know we're evacuating right now. The Civil War stopped for the time being, and everyone is fleeing the capital. It's not as chaotic as you might expect, though. The 9 divine generals and whatnot probably serve as a unifying force. But that alone wouldn't be enough. As I thought, you're quite the big deal, man. Honestly, when I heard the story of you being betrayed by your right-hand man and retainer, being ousted from the throne, I really wonder if it'd be fine to have you back as emperor, but it turned out to be the right option. It annoys me that, rather than being on the fence about it, I was leaning towards believing it, but I was right. You are the emperor. Is that as per your expectations as well? A quiet voice, however, it had certainly been laced with emotion. As it seemed way out of left field, Subaru's brain refused to comprehend it. As a result, Subaru did not dodge the hand thus was extended, his forehead being pushed down onto the bed, his body following suit. And before he could raise an objection as to what the hell was going on, he received the sensation of something sharp against his throat, which he immediately realized to be the tip of the paring knife with which the appa had just been split. He had made that realization, yet he knew not the intent behind it. He knew not the meaning of Abel clasping that knife, and turning it towards Subaru in that manner, directing his hostility at him. From near proximity, within breathing distance of one another, Subaru and Abel shared mutual glares. What do you want? That ought to be my question. What are your plans? To what extent exactly have you seen the current course of events unfold? Is everything up to this point in accordance with the picture you have painted? I told you already, I don't know what you're talking about. Why did you leave me behind, not Chisha? In comparison to the blade at his throat, the tone of his voice cut by far and away more deeply. It silenced Subaru, and Abel's hand shook, trembling while gripping the knife. As Abel gritted his teeth, as he glowered at Subaru from point-blank range, having asserted so, Abel, Vincent Valekia, I am no Abel. I am none other than the 77th Emperor of the Valakian Empire, Vincent Valekia. That is the course you have desired, is it not? You went to war so you could reclaim that name and that crown, didn't you? Incorrect. I was striving to fulfill my duty as Emperor. The covenant with the people of Sharrock, the fall of the fortress city, the negotiations with Yorna Mishigure, and the provocation of civil war were all for that purpose. While on the throne, Vincent Valekia will be killed. With that as the starting point, the Great Disaster will attempt to destroy the Empire. The means to oppose it being left behind by Vincent Valekia, that is my duty. Subaru exhaled a hoarse breath. That expression, Great Disaster, was one unfamiliar to Subaru's ears, but what astonished him even more was the very way Vincent had recited it. Per his words, upon the demise of Vincent Valekia, the Great Demise would commence. The way you spoke, it's kinda like you knew you were going to die. With death perhaps creeping closer to Subaru, before him, Vincent's sable eyes wavered with uncertainty. The vast expanse that laid beyond their jet-black coloration, he had a hunch on its true identity. 'Twas resignation, adored with the will to resist. Indeed, I have made my demise a part of my plans. I left behind plans to ensure that the Valakian Empire would not fall to ruin, even with mine passing. The next very instant, Subaru's mind was stained red, and his emotions burst out. You bastard, stop goddamn screwing around! He gave Vincent, no, the cowardly bastard before him, the death stare, bellowing out. There was a flash of acute pain in his neck, but that could be postponed. Right here and now, it was much more important to just beat the living shit out of this wimp wearing a self-righteous face. After manipulating so many people, after making them cross so many dangerous bridges, after making them take so many unnecessary detours with you, you plan to die at the end of it all? Don't joke around. As if I would do anything such as jest. Everything you have spoken of was done because it was the road that needed to be taken. At its terminus was to be my death, a matter the importance of which cannot possibly be compared to the survival of the Empire, which hangs in the balance. That's not it. What I'm saying is, why is that the first thing you do, is give up your very own life? Some huge disaster? Don't know anything about it. Wouldn't it be better to just stay alive and face it yourself? Do you lot not know any better but to chatter nonsense? While I live, the great disaster shan't come. This is the premise of this plan. It cannot be overturned. Who the hell decided it can't be overturned? You've got a good head on you, so whether it be the Great Disaster or anything else, you could just deceive it and lure it out. And then... Yet it was you, stargazers, who declared that it could never be overturned. Vincent, stifling his emotions, had been replying to a Subaru prattling on and on with sentimentality, but the former's emotions had come to this point, and now exploded before Subaru's eyes. In drips, blood trickled from Vincent's left hand, having seized the tip of the blade, staining the white sheets here and there. However, neither Subaru nor Vincent paid any mind to the falling droplets of blood, instead focusing their attention towards each other's eyes, towards the very essence of the other's being beyond said eyes. Yet again, Vincent had dubbed Subaru a stargazer. Therein lied the unmistakable reason as to why Vincent Valekia hated, harbored hostility towards Natsuki Subaru, even going as far as to put the knife to his throat. It was precisely because he happened to understand it that those doubts could not be resolved. The stargazers declared. The stargazers hear the voices of the observers from the heavens above, that exist beyond the framework. They speak of events that may occur in the far future, conferring us with the possibility of minimizing the damage. Still, that is but a matter of the scale of said damage, not of how to prevent it from happening beforehand. In a disgusted voice, yet attempting to stifle any emotion as much as possible, Vincent began to speak. Subaru was reminded of one thing amidst the contents of his speech. If the stargazers were truly able to foretell the future, from his experience, actually being able to change it would be no easy feat. Whether it ought to be called the power of fate or a natural flow of time, it would stick to a predetermined path as much as possible. Those who attempted to avoid the impending tragedies would be brought to their knees. The stargazers' precognitions, they were akin to what Subaru knew from experience. For example, were Subaru to return by death due to a natural catastrophe, even if he could urge everyone to take refuge in preparation, he would be unable to stop the natural catastrophe itself. Many times in the past, the stargazers have precluded correctly the perils that would befall the Empire. Those crises were dealt with to the fullest possible extent, but some things could not be saved. Therefore, plans are necessary. Plans with which to keep the damage at a minimum, and lessen those lost to as close to zero as possible. It was you, stargazers, who whispered of my death. How dare you with that mouth utter that my death must be defied? Are you toying with me? Wait a second, for quite some time now, I'm not a stargazer or anything like that. You see things that have yet to happen. Cease your deception, Natsuki Subaru. In the process of spewing out the recesses of his very own heart, the mask of the Emperor had fallen away. And visible on the other side was not the face of Vincent Valekia, but rather the face of a man rife with defects who went by the name of Abel. And finally, once the man looked at him directly, once the man declared those words, Subaru finally comprehended. Vincent, nay Abel, had dubbed him a stargazer, as Abel had perceived Subaru's return by death. So, that's why you always tried to listen to my advice? You left me behind, not Chisha, Natsuki Subaru. You are a banal human being. In a form different from the one just prior, the timbre of that voice was devoid of sentiment. There was no attempt to repress emotions. If there indeed was such an attempt, those very real emotions would still be eked out, able to be heard in their venture to appeal outwards. Yet nothing was heard. They were not being repressed, those emotions had died. Abel let loose words bereft of hue towards Subaru. A naive, green, immature human being holding on to plenty of bitterness. Neither do you possess virtue worthy of mention, nor do you possess viciousness worthy of mention. With neither of those, you would have accomplished nothing and died an ordinary man. Subaru's characterization, spoken to matter-of-factly, left absolutely no room for retort. Subaru could not become anyone special. Even immersed in the lack of maturity of his body and mind, with his spirit returned to the days when he had believed himself to be a child prodigy, he also knew what he would eventually be in the future to come, a half-baked human being. You have been bestowed with the opportunity to surpass banal, ordinary men. By making perfect use of it, you have survived till this day. You have not been banal. You have not been an ordinary person. You have no strong disposition towards either virtue or viciousness. You are a banal human being. If so, why? Firmly, potently, Abel tightly gritted his teeth, looking at Subaru. He cast away his expression, his nobleness and his graciousness, his composure and his self-confidence, and everything entirely, bearing the true face visible behind the mask of the Emperor that had been stripped away, his voice quivering. Why did you leave me behind, Natsuki Subaru? You have no bond to this empire, nor any obligations. You could have been content with protecting the many you have come to know to this day, and nothing more. For what reason did you save me? For what reason did you think to try and save me, a man who does not get along with you? Why? With more and more strength, he grasped the blade of the knife, digging even deeper into his hand. More and more grew the intense flow of blood, so painful to gaze at that Subaru instantly attempted to release Abel's grip on the knife to staunch the hemorrhage. His hand was violently swatted away as Vincent yelled to not touch him. Just now, when you reached out your hand to help, you did it again. That is what is most baffling, and what is most incompatible with me in your way of being. Every so often you leave it all to the emotions you feel at the moment, punting to the wayside all beliefs and ideas you have felt until then. You do not follow what you have decided upon, easily reversing whatever course you have concluded that you ought to be taking. You are unable to categorize what ought to be saved or not, reaching out your hand indiscriminately. His blood oozing out, Subaru gulped down a breath. His thoughts froze over, because what Abel had stated just now held the exact same meaning as what had tormented Subaru on a recent occasion. That Todd and Natsuki Subaru were incompatible in every sense possible. That Natsuki Subaru was a monster that he could never understand. Such was the blade of words that Todd Fang had trained upon him, decisively forced their separation against Subaru's will. He, too, though not drawing that conclusion about Subaru owning return by death or owing to his status as a stargazer, had seen through Subaru's peculiarities, and defined him as such. Perhaps it was through his power of observation, honed through his life as a werewolf. The two overlapped. The reason for that, undoubtedly, was that both were attempting to part with Subaru, a preface for ousting Natsuki Subaru, rejecting he whose way of being was incompatible with theirs from their world. Thus, what had driven Todd to commit these heinous acts he had committed, as per his words, had been Subaru's way of thinking and behavior. Of course, Subaru had not just accepted it without questioning, and he did not consider himself to be at fault. It was what he had always done and thought to be correct in his own Subaru way. But were he to so easily change his ways, Subaru would be unable to show his face to the companions who had followed him, who had placed their faith in him till this day. At the same time, however, there was a truth that he could not repudiate completely. Subaru was choosing who to let live and who to let die, as he had indeed stated. Through the authority of return by death, Subaru had transfigured the fates of those precious to him, those who had no choice but to lose their lives, those who had no choice but to hurt him, those who had no choice but to struggle for what was dear to them, those who had no choice but to deprive themselves of the opportunity to reach a mutual understanding. He had distorted their fates and kept them alive. Through the decisions and actions Subaru had taken, assuredly, the number of people around Subaru who have been robbed of their lives or become sorrowful had diminished. However, Natsuki Subaru had not been capable of saving every single person either. Whether he went without saving them or without being able to save them, though, those differed on whether he did it proactively or reactively. His decision had been thus. And so, without him turning back the clock, the onward march of reality imposed itself as immovable. It was not as though he had destroyed all of his enemies, but it was not that he had saved all of his enemies either. Just how had Subaru come to decide which to save and which not to save? That was possibly due to Subaru's personal likes and dislikes, was Todd's fear. No, that is not so, Natsuki Subaru. It's not even up to your own like or dislikes towards others. Shaking his head, Abel's words restrained Subaru, the latter having been made aware of the unbridgeable gap between himself and Todd once more. Were you to determine who to save and who not to save based on your subjective preferences of people's characters, that I would be able to understand, but you even save those who you loathe, such as me. It's not like that, so you wish to assert. Yet Subaru's words did not continue. Whether Subaru hated Abel enough to abandon him at the 11th hour was something that he would only understand were he to do some deep introspection. But it was true that he had reached out his hand to someone he loathed. He had been unable to reach, but in spite of that, Subaru had attempted to reach out to Todd as well. Finishing things without letting go, their conflict notwithstanding, Luis had remained alongside Subaru to this day. Take your people from the kingdom and leave Wallachia. From this point forwards, the Empire shall be plunged into battle against the great disaster. The board is different from the one I was attempting to arrange, but alas, a way through remains. Therein you are not required. I have heard enough nonsense. Whatever your intentions may be, what you have already done must be considered definite. Questioning the merits of your reasoning for that would be an act akin to futility of the utmost extremes. Those were not so much words directed towards Subaru as they were words directed towards his own self. The exchange in which he had gotten emotional with Subaru and the exchange in which he had bared all of his emotions, Abel was about to unilaterally terminate the exchange that encompassed the entirety of both that had taken place here. A topic mentioned both when things had gotten emotional and when the emotions had died. The name Chisha was one Subaru had gotten an idea about. Judging from how he had voiced it all, Chisha had apparently lost his life amidst the siege of the Imperial capital. Why Subaru had not saved him? To ask such a thing must have been Abel's true intentions. Attempting to cover up those intentions, Abel would try to pretend that such things had never truly happened. Make preparations to return to your country. All necessary arrangements will be made for you to cross the border. Everything after that will be the Empire's problem. Mine problem. Thus, changing his way of referring to himself and restraining all of his conduct as Abel were signs of the resolution he had arrived at to move forth as Emperor Vincent Wallachia, and just how meaningful, just how heavy were the things he had been entrusted with, and if those had been the reasons for his decisions, were all things Subaru could not possibly understand. Natsuki Subaru could not understand Vincent Wallachia. Likewise, Vincent Wallachia could not understand Natsuki Subaru. And with that, this fruitless period was coming to an end, with not more than both shedding the other's blood. You're a monster, much more so than that zombie. That understanding one another was impossible, that the gap could not be bridged, that a separation was unavoidable. Both had reached such a conclusion on their own. Both had arbitrarily decided such things on their own, and both had ended things like that all on their own. Turning his back, his conduct indicating that the conversation had drawn to a close, the Emperor advanced towards the door. The slender back making its departure was called out to by Subaru, being referred to as Abel. Do you understand? I am Vincent Wallachia. Any man that goes by Abel is shut the hell up. Let's see you grit those teeth. Subaru blasted off the bed, and he drove his small, blood-soaked fist into Vincent's pompous profile, something he had wanted to do for a long, long time. The moment he threw that punch, it was the moment he felt the most frustrated about having become smaller, even more so than the tragedy of the Gladiator Island, in which he had been able to unite everyone in order to prevent something, even more so than the spark had used to win Gustav over to his side, even more so than his dialogue with Cecilis under the moon. At this very moment, that he could have punched him just a little harder were he to have a larger body, made him frustrated. Taking the blow from the young Subaru's fist on his left cheek, the Emperor, his face soiled with blood, widened his eyes. Do you not hold your life dear? If I were to raise mine hand, the flame of the Yang sword would scorch your very being. Yep, it's not dear to me, compared to letting you go without giving you a wallop right here and now. Something like burning to death isn't scary at all. That he did not hold his life dear to him, such a thing was a downright lie, but in this tit-for-tat, he did not want to show even a hint of weakness. It's just as you guys say, I think. I can't be understood. After all, even I myself don't really understand what my criteria is for taking action. Vincent could not understand. The man before Subaru's eyes was the Emperor, the other man nothing more than a foot soldier without an officer rank, and yet the wounds that both had given to Subaru, the scars they had both pointed out, were one and the same. I want to prioritize the people I like, the people I hold dear and protect them. Those are my honest feelings, but even if it's someone I hate or someone I don't know, and they're put into danger right in front of me, then Todd had said that Subaru would choose who to save based on his own subjective likes and dislikes. Abel had said that Subaru would recklessly choose who to save regardless of likes and dislikes. Both of these were correct, and since they were both correct, they were mistaken. After all, is that really such a bad thing? Is that so bad? Without the resolve to try and carry the whole world on my back, and without any grand significance, is it really so bad if I save those who are right in front of me on impulse? It's just as you said. I consider the things within my own range of vision. I reach out as far as I can. That's what I've been doing until today. What's so bad about that? You dare now object? What is so bad, you say? Is it not obvious? For what reason do you not focus upon the greater picture, and instead act upon your own selfish emotions, the authority bestowed upon you? For what reason do you not put it to good use? I use absolutely everything. I'm standing here because I put it to good use. Don't get emotional, huh? Stop talking like an idiot. The way I choose to use my own emotions is up to me. Then at least act in accordance with those emotions. If you are to decide between somebody's life or death based on your own likes and dislikes, do not deviate from that method in any sort of way. Your way of being is riddled with distortions. If that's your conclusion for me leading a righteous life, I'm all for having a warped personality. As the Emperor continued to rebuke Subaru's attitude, the latter delivered a powerful kick as he replied, kicking the Emperor's shin over and over again. His anger, too much to be contained, erupted in full. The Emperor contorted his cheeks. We shall speak no further. The Emperor seized Subaru's shoulders and tried to move him out of the way. With the strength of a child, he could not go against an adult. That was why. Subaru bit down on his hand with all of his might. He engraved the Emperor's right hand with a bite wound. Both of his hands now bleeding from different wounds, Subaru grabbed the Emperor's front, pressed his head against his abdomen, and clipped his knees, taking a mounted position. Were the back of one's head to be struck over and over again, no matter who it was, they would be knocked out instantly. However, do not get carried away. The first time, shock. The second time, confusion. The third time, although he had been successful in bringing the back of his head to the ground, he was stopped by a simple difference in strength. Furthermore, Subaru was thrown off the Emperor's body, having been grabbed by the hair. Subaru tumbled to the floor, seeing Vincent stand back up in his peripheral, attempting to head to the door once again. Jumping onto his knees from behind, by any means of sheer force, he halted the body moving towards the door, knocking Vincent over and slamming his face into the door. He stood up once more, seizing Subaru by the collar with both of his hands, hoisting him up. He slammed Subaru's back against the door. You, what do you want? What is your objective? What is it that you desire? I want to hit you. My objective is to hit you. My desire is to hit you. What about you? What do you want? What is your objective? Just what the hell is it that you desire? Twisting his head, Subaru opened his mouth in an attempt to bite the Emperor's hand one more time, but he could not reach it. Vincent muttered, My desire? That's right. There's gotta be something you wanted to do apart from spouting grandiose and meaningless words at me. If not, you wouldn't go out of your way to come at me at such a busy time. Aren't you the one that doesn't understand yourself the most? While you were talking just now, there was something you put the most energy into, something you put the most emotion into. That's what's most important to you. The topic of evacuating from the Imperial capital, or the topic of suspecting Subaru being a stargazer, the topic of dealing with Amelia and the others, who had hailed from the kingdom, to the topic of the Divine stemming from being unable to understand Subaru's way of being. Now that he thought of it, there had been no words expressing sympathy for Subaru after his recovery. In the first place, this bastard had not said anything in regards to this being their first meeting after the Demon City either. But putting all of those numerous affairs aside, the one topic he was the most passionate about was obvious. Chisha. Why, Natsuki Subaru? The heat that had boiled over just before during their grappling match disappeared. However, in its place was a cold heat, a heat set alight by that question, not uttered once more. If that which accompanied violence was a scarlet flame, then that question had been accompanied by a flame of azure hue. The azure glow blazing in his eyes, it scorched Subaru as he stood before the Emperor, while the latter posed his question. I was the one who trained him. If it were him, he would have been able to do the same work as me without even the slightest deviation. It could even be said that he was superior in regards to military power, depending on the circumstances. There were no differences between mine and that damned Chisha's ability. Whichever of us remained would take over the fight to oppose the great disaster, seeing it through to completion. Why? Staring directly into Subaru's black eyes, Abel's black eyes wavered. The mask of the Emperor was once again ripped off, and Subaru gazed upon Abel's face. Why did you let me live, despite your loathing, and let Chisha die, Natsuki Subaru? The sorrow, the fragility contained within that voice were incomparable to what they had been just before. The Emperor, known as Vincent Valaquia, utilized absolutely everything in his possession for the sake of the Empire, ruling over the great country that possessed the vastest lands among those known in this world as the Four Great Countries. He ruled as an omnipresent and all-seeing existence. For that Emperor to issue that question not for the sake of the Empire, but rather as a mere single person, was evidence that this singular question carried a weight rivaling that of the Empire itself. Perceiving that in his skin, his blood, his brain, his very soul, Subaru's heart trembled. Just why was it that the person known as Chisha had to die? Unbeknownst to Subaru, Abel and Chisha had each been placed on different plates of scale, and one of those two sides had fallen into a situation beyond saving. Thus, Abel had intended to share in the fate of the scale as his own side tipped into perdition. That envisioning had been painted over, most likely by the deceased Shisha himself. Abel had likely prepared for his own death since long ago. If one was born, someday their life would assuredly reach its end. All were aware of such a fact, but it was just as if Abel's situation was completely different to the reality everyone unconsciously ignored. Resolve towards destined death. That was no different from Subaru confronting the trigger of his return by death. Always, Abel had been squaring off against his own forthcoming death. With the same resolve as Subaru, who fought to the bitter end while believing that the arrival of death was something that could be changed. That it was something that must be changed no matter what. Abel continued to fight. If Subaru were to go without dying, Emilia, Rem, and Beatrice would end up dying. Otto and everyone else, Tanza and everyone else, all of the Shodrock, Flop, and Medium, a great number of people would end up dying. In exchange for his own life, he attempted to allow everyone to survive. If he had come to expend the entirety of his resolve for that purpose, then it must have been the same for Abel. Emilia, Rem, and Beatrice, they had all taken Subaru's place, permitting his survival. They had all become sacrifices so he could survive. Even if nobody else was capable of understanding that despair, Natsuki Subaru was the single person who had to keep it in mind. Nullifying that possibility, painting over that reality by means of his authority, Natsuki Subaru was the single person who would not deny the despair that Abel was going through without paying any heed. I'm not a stargazer, Abel. The words he spoke, they probably seemed like a betrayal this late in the game. Subaru had not returned the reply of Abel's desire, instead keeping it to himself, but however much Abel suspected Subaru, reality would not budge. Perhaps Subaru was able to do the same things a stargazer could. Perhaps Subaru possessed some means with which to intervene with fate to an extent greater than a stargazer's own means. Even so, he was not omnipotent. He would never be omnipotent. That's why I couldn't save this Chisha person you're talking about. I wouldn't know how to save him either, but I'll just say this one thing. Supposing I really did have a power like the one you speak of, even then, I'd choose to save you, who I hate, rather than someone I don't know. Without reasons like seeing ahead to what lies in the future, that's what I would do. That's what I will do. Truly, even he himself thought his nature was a helpless one, but that was the result that Natsuki Subaru, by consulting with the abilities he possessed within what he understood to be the realms of what were his own capabilities, had reached. Slowly, strength left Abel's hold on his collar, and Subaru's body was released. A frail sound was produced by Abel's lips. If you claim to not be a stargazer. His black eyes began to wander, in search of the words he truly desired. He would put emotions into words, perhaps the Emperor of the Empire, who had not once done such a thing to this day, who had not once done something that even a toddler was capable of, would now do so. You would try to save me no matter what. In a situation where the survival of the Empire is at stake, you occupy me with such trifles, of such insignificance. Each time his words would get stuck halfway through. No matter the words, no matter the emotions, they were not enough to express what Abel felt in his heart of hearts. Repeatedly, Abel ceased speaking, revised his words, and corrected himself, yet Subaru did not rush him. His intelligent self realized that the responses of his desires lay not beyond his faltering words. Abel started the words he ought to say anew, over and over again, and thus, after repetitions upon repetitions, he finally managed to do it. I had resolved myself for my own death. I had not resolved myself to lose someone dear. Having only forged his resolve to be the one leaving the rest behind, his resolve for being left behind had not been cultivated. Perhaps he had even gone as far as to think about what words he would leave behind in his final moments. There was even the possibility one would find notes here and there left after his death, if they were to search. Why? A quavering voice questioned so. His blood-stained hands left Subaru's collar and touched his own face to conceal his expression. The Emperor, who would by no means even close both of his eyes in front of others, covered his face with both of his hands. Why did you leave me behind and die, Chisha? His face in his hands, his voice trembling, his black eyes potentially even tearing up, Vincent Valakia fell to his knees. Having lost a very, very important person, the man who had likely not even had the time to grieve, not needing to wear the mask of Emperor in front of a rude and disrespectful individual whom he hated, fell to his knees. Witnessing just that, Subaru, taking a very long and immensely deep breath, I'm sorry. With that, as a fellow struggler fighting against an unreasonable fate, he faced the fellow struggler who had been wounded while earnestly continuing to fight, and imparted words that would never be able to serve as comfort. When swinging at Abel as he tried to leave, what came to Subaru's mind was the memory of the time Otto had once punched him in a similar manner. You're incredible, man. I could never be as bright as you. I'll never say that to his face, though. With a thud, Subaru leaned his back against the wall of the cabin as he sat on the ground, observing the dim interior of the cabin as he hugged one of his knees. Some time ago, at a time Subaru had been on the verge of buckling under the weight of attempting to carry anything and everything by his lonesome, Otto had given a wallop to Subaru's cheek, had lambasted him with words he needed to hear. That he was keeping up useless airs in front of his friends, so he was told. That experience had given Subaru the courage to spring off the bed. Not like you and I are friends or anything. He casually remarks to the Emperor, "Of course, speak not of such repulsive things. Being a friend of yours? No. I simply have no need for the likes of friends, nor shall I ever want them." So your reasoning isn't that you can't make friends, but that you won't make them. I also did that when I pretended to be a proud lone wolf, but it's completely obvious to the people around you. Your disrespect knows no bounds, now does it? No longer were the heated emotions from their grappling scuffle present, but on the other hand, they were not vanished to the point that they would abort their conversation midway. Natsuki Subaru, is it the truth that you are not a stargazer? It's true. I'm not a stargazer or anything like that. Stuff like premonitions of the future, that fits the witch cult more than it fits me. I don't really get along with those guys. I did happen to hear that you felled 2 Sin Archbishops in Lagunica. It's not public, but it's actually 3. Gluttony's been as well. Nah, it's kind of difficult to say whether Gluttony's been defeated or not, so forget about that. Louisa's situation is also... Oh, you didn't do anything to her, right? After all, I still haven't forgiven you for that time you said she was to be killed. Speak not of foolish things, though was it not you who thoroughly hated that girl? Before is before, now is now. To begin with, if you've kept your impression of me from our first meeting, you doubt my sanity before considering the crowd I get along with. Your sanity is something I have doubted since the Shuderakian village. Your concern is unnecessary. No harm has been inflicted upon that girl. After all, what I had to say back then was not that we ought to execute someone whose apparent identity was that of a Sin Archbishop right then and there. You jumped to a hasty conclusion. It was just in case, so you would not wish for my survival. All grounded on the conjecture that you were a stargazer. You, who continues to produce results unprecedented within the kingdom, have performed deeds no ordinary person would be able to. Although, there was no need for me to go out of my way to worsen your impression of me. Even if I did not act as such, you are the type of person who would detest me the most. Abhorrence and disdain. They both overflow from your heart. I don't know anything about that Chisha guy. He kicked you out of the throne and turned himself into you pretending to be the Emperor. I only happened upon him in Chaos Flame when he was posing as Emperor. I don't get what that person was thinking or what he had been scheming in driving you away from the palace, but you got frustrated in such a way because that person died. And if he really did die when you were supposed to, I do get that. Therefore, that Chisha person, he sure was incredible. You said there wouldn't be a big difference whether you or that person was left behind. If that's true, then there's only one reason why that person made this situation. Are you saying that you understand? The reason why Chisha plotted against me? With fate trying to kill you, you resigned yourself to the opponent that was fate. That's gotta have irritated him. That's also a stereotype of, like, wanting someone to live even at the expense of your own life. But I don't think that's the case here. After all, the way you live wouldn't have anyone do anything of the sort for you. Chisha got irritated because of you. After all, he even proved it. Flop and Mazelda have probably also realized that you're a moron with a good head on him. What I mean is, the reach of the thing known as fate. Fate. As though vocalizing that word for the first time, Abel's tongue became acquainted with that unfamiliar concept, muttering so. For Abel, who confronted everything head-on, who resisted endlessly, armed with his own predictions, all impediments could be put into words. Likely, he had not realized his opponent was something so absurd, so formless as fate. Fate can be fought. There's no reason to give up, not even a single one. Faintly catching his breath, Abel kept silent as if the words he had been told had struck his very heart. Had he not believed his enemy to be fate, likely he would not have thought to fight it or to even resist it. It would not have been something he had even considered. Abel, I'm not a stargazer, but I'll save as many people as I possibly can, as long as they're within the range of my hand. Even so, if there truly are still lives I'm not able to save, that's a defeat served to you by fate, would it not be so? I can't get a complete victory. After all, it's not just me who's fighting fate. He had not been able to save everything, thus, Subaru was unable to declare that he was going to save everything, even from here onwards. While roaring for that inevitable fate to bring it on, while vowing to continue to fight against fate, yet still being faced with the loss of lives, Natsuki Subaru would mourn and lament, only to then continue to declare such things. Lend me your strength, Abel. If you do that, I'll also lend you mine. From this point onwards, I'll cooperate in full. That said, I won't say selfish things without consulting Amelia and the others, but that's just how passionate I am. That's why, saying that, Subaru stood up and advanced towards the middle of the cabin. He reached his hands into the basket of fruits, picking up the two halves of the apple Abel had sliced up. "Help me finish eating the apple you cut in half." Tossing half of the apple over to Abel, he sunk his teeth into the half he held onto. Abel brought his eyes down towards it, and after a moment of hesitation, he bit into it. Whether he liked it or disliked it, hated or loved it, was completely unrelated to that flavor. As fellow living beings, there would be no difference in the flavor of the apple that they had shared. "Natsuki Subaru, I am not fond of you, but I require your strength." Declaring so, Abel slowly stood up, his eyes trained upon Subaru. Once again, he hid all the hues of uncharacteristic emotions that he had displayed within the cabin behind his consciousness as the Emperor. However, while those yet revealed themselves ever so slightly via his eyes and voice. "Apologies for mine many acts of rudeness, O Knight of the Kingdom." With that, upon seeing the Emperor of the Sacred Valachian Empire bow his head, Subaru smiled, smiling while biting into what remained of the appa. "I won't apologize for my many acts of disrespect, Emperor of the Empire." And with that, the first step to rectify the discrepancies in their relationship, which had been mistaken ever since its very start, was taken. Vincent Valachia versus Abel seems to be a very significant conflict with Vincent's character, and it was staring me in the face, but I failed to notice that Abel was just a play on his initial last name, which I think pretty well highlights the purpose of the two masks. Vincent Valachia is cold, calculating, and logical above all else. Him wielding the name Abel for most of Arc 7 is a reference not to the Valachian side of Vincent, but the man known as Abelix that sits underneath. The guy who feels, loves, and grows attached. The Oni mask he wore earlier in the arc in conjunction with the name Abel was to hide that side of himself, as evidenced by it coming off when appealing to Yorna. It also goes to show Rem's perceptiveness in their conversation prior to Vincent's entrance to Subaru's room. She was fully aware that if she were speaking to Vincent Valachia, her words would fall on deaf ears, so she tried to speak to Abel, not Vincent. This can also be observed in the narration constantly switching between Vincent, the Emperor, and Abel, generally using Abel at his most vulnerable moments. I believe I mentioned this in my Phase 8 video, but I saw this entire confrontation coming with the knowledge that Subaru was fighting to live, while Vincent was fighting to die. The only natural conclusion to come from this would be a conflict between the two, and the conflict centers around the appa. Vincent does not even recognize the appa in its current form because the appa is supposed to signify fate. This becomes clear at the end of this conversation because the concept of fate is an ethereal one to Vincent. It's something he does not fundamentally understand. The appa is split in two, signifying the differences between Subaru and Vincent's approaches, with Subaru saying fuck fate and fuck the stars, but something like that was never in Vincent's scope. The same enemy, but two different halves, which come together at the end as they both eat their own half of the appa. Despite them not grasping the same enemy, Vincent still had the same plan as Subaru as well, planning to use his life to win just like Subaru once did in Arc 4. Remember how I said the Arc 5 speech is like a sequel to Subaru's Arc 3 breakdown? Well, this Arc 8 conflict seems like a sequel to Otto's Arc 4 moment, something acknowledged by Subaru himself in the story. He gets to take Otto's position, to feel the anger against someone who has given up against a seemingly insurmountable enemy, to feel the annoyance of someone who can't see past their own nose and acknowledge those who helped them get this far. And just like the Arc 5 speech, this is just a great showing of how far Subaru has come. Also, I'm recording and adding this part literally right now in editing. The apple, which Subaru is already familiar with being peeled because he's peeled it himself, also stands in for fate, whereas Abel sees apples already peeled because other people do it for him, and now this is the first time he has conceived of the enemy of fate. Sorry, you can hear my air conditioner. Okay, bye. This also displays Vincent's childishness, which really does make sense considering the life he would have lived as a noble and a man really only dedicating himself to die for the great disaster. He is completely emotionally stunted, having zero clue how to express himself. He doesn't know what he feels, he can't put into words how he feels, he lashes out at those around him, and he just can't make sense of what's happening until the very end. And this makes the concept of continuing infantilization even more worth it. Back in Phase 4, it became clear that infantilization had the purpose of highlighting Subaru's naivety and childlike behavior. Now, it's highlighted that the two aren't that different in their own respects, and shows that Subaru's childlike thought processes aren't intrinsically wrong, as this encounter dives straight back into the logistics of Subaru's hero complex. Vincent can't understand this aspect of Subaru's character leading to the Stargazer accusation, even though Subaru's goal is completely opposite to the Stargazers, and it goes to show that just because the other person can't understand Subaru doesn't mean that Subaru can't understand them. Subaru can understand them all too well, especially someone like Vincent, but Todd had completely closed off any avenue for Subaru to reach out and try to connect with him, while Subaru barged into the small hole left open in Vincent's heart. Throughout this entire encounter, we also see Tape do an excellent job, as always, portraying complex emotion, something he's always been especially good at, especially with Subaru's continual relapses into depression. Abel's mask had to be ripped off multiple times for him to actually say anything, to say what he had been trying to say the entire time, and Subaru's admission that he can't save everything is a very refreshing take, and it's realistic. Subaru couldn't save Chisha, and that's something he just has to accept. He can save as many people as he can, but some people are always going to be out of his grasp because he's only one person, and it's a refreshing thing to hear from Subaru, who is still riding the high of the Pleiades Battalion and the mass abuse of return by death from the Gladiator Island, which will surely have insane consequences going into the future. The last couple of things I want to mention are that Vincent refers to Subaru's power as an authority, which is an especially loaded term, and is not something he has done prior, which is interesting. I don't know if this was a mistake from Tapei, or if stargazing is supposed to be an authority, which doesn't really make sense, or if Vincent just believes that they are authorities and doesn't actually know. It's an interesting tidbit, I don't know what to make of it. Vincent also makes mention of Subaru's incredible feats across Lagunica, which lets us know for sure that this is a globally known thing. I always thought eventually that this is going to come back to him. You know, you can't just show up one day and kill 3 Saint Archbishops. This has to be plot relevant later. And with Vincent's pointing out of it, and some meta knowledge, we know it will matter, as Tapei in a recent Q&A stated that his conquest of accomplishments has not gone unnoticed by the officials of Lagunica. Rem looked up quietly as a voice called to her from her side. The woman beside her donned silver hair and a soft look in her eyes, and Rem's feelings were complicated. Beatrice would speak up, holding onto Amelia's hand. Rem is also concerned about where the discussion is going, I suppose. Standing in the empty passageway, Rem looked towards the door to Subaru's quarters. Amelia asks Rem if Subaru and Vincent get along, to which of course she informs her that they are not very friendly. Beatrice puffs out her chest, stating that was predictable. Abel's way of thinking, and Subaru's go like oil and water, I suppose. Betty prefers the sentimental way Subaru thinks. Rem was unfamiliar with these people, though she understood that they came a long way looking for both her and Subaru, and unlike Subaru, did not carry a stench that inspired fierce, instinctive alarm. Although, she would also make note of Subaru's scent slowly fading away. She was concerned, though. It might also be better that his smell was going away. She ponders this as Medium opens the carriage door, waving her hands around vigorously, and her tall stature could not be ignored. She had fully grown arms and legs appropriate for her age. See, I finally have a big body again, don't I? Now, unlike when I was little, I can stop adults from fighting, so I thought I could be useful here. As she said this, the door to Subaru's quarters opens, and a conversation can be heard unfolding. Anyways, let's sneak over to Garfield. If it's him, he should be able to understand our unavoidable circumstances. What, the scandal of how a knight of the kingdom raised his hand against the emperor of the empire? Don't forget, if that goes to trial, I'll talk about everything you've been up to as a last resort. The eyes of Rem's group met the black eyes of the 2 men as they peeked out to see whether there was anyone in the aisle. Subaru opened his mouth with an Abel frowned with an ugh. However, that was not the extent of the reactions of Rem's group when they saw the state of the 2 of them. After all, both Subaru and Abel were covered in blood. As the group caused a commotion, Subaru and Abel met each other's gaze, and Subaru raised his hands in resignation. The eerie silence of a dimly lit cabin would be broken by none other than Jamal. A personal request from Subaru to Rem was for Rem to take him to Katya. Katya kept her blue eyes, framed by long lashes, downcast. Is your body doing better now? Even if it was just a prelude to the main topic, her concern for Subaru's body was kind. Her tone was blunt and brusque, but there was no doubt that she was a lovely woman at heart. And that was why she had become close to the unreliable Rem. Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks for worrying about me. I wasn't worried or anything, it's just that this girl seemed anxious. With a glance, Subaru looked towards Rem as she stood next to him, her expression stiff. Knowing what was going to be discussed, he did not overreact to Katya's words. Although it was something he had anticipated, Subaru admonished his own weakness, which made him want to put off the main topic. Taking a deep breath, he exhaled, and then... I'm sorry. I couldn't bring Todd back. Squeezing his small fist tightly, overcome with grief, Subaru let the cruel truth be known. He was washed away by the floodwater that swept into the city, but any more than that, it's just that in the fight against the zombies, he acted as a decoy and suffered a lot of injuries. That's why... Subaru could have given Katya a hope, had he wished to. The reality was that the last time Subaru had laid eyes upon Todd, he had been swallowed up by the muddy current, disappearing. It was supposedly possible to show some hope for his survival, in case his body had gone without being found, but Subaru did not do that. Jamal grit his teeth, a noise that echoed throughout the cabin. Subaru also wanted to hope that Todd had survived, if possible. However, since he had a history of dealing with Todd on many occasions, he understood. Todd was just an ordinary person with no special powers. The fact that he was a werewolf was not an advantage, which could overturn the life-threatening situation. In a helpless situation where Subaru would die, Todd would also lose his life. Todd Feng had been swallowed up by that flood, had perished. As a person who, in the end, had been the closest witness to the final moment of his life, that was Subaru's conclusion. You didn't see the crucial part of it, did you? Then maybe he's not dead. Her voice, faltering and cracking, caused Subaru to look up. Not only Subaru, but also Rem and Jamal, All looked at Katya upon the bed. She fiddled with her hair, her blue eyes quivering. What if you'd seen Todd's head get smashed in, or his body cut in half, or burned to a crisp, something like that, you might think so, yes, but he really, really clings to his life, and besides, when we parted ways, he told me he'd come back soon. Definitely back to me. He'd never lie. Even when he told me that my brother had died, he just misspoke, that's all. Raising her voice, Katya started clawing at her hair. The sight of it made Rem call out to her, and she cuddled up on the bunk to hold Katya's head. Large tears streamed from Katya's eyes, soaking Rem's clothes as she hugged her. Without minding that, Rem continued to stroke her sobbing friend's back. Subaru's heart was intensely torn by Katya's honest reaction. He understood that Katya would be hurt this way by telling her about Todd. It was a really, really complicated relationship, but Todd's feelings for Katya were likely genuine. That was why Subaru had not mentioned the crueler truth. Not even Rem was aware of it. It was Rem who had finished off Todd, who had turned into an unrecognizable werewolf, and Subaru had no intention of enlightening her on the matter. Todd loved Katya, and Katya loved him back. That was what mattered. There was no reason to destroy those memories and dwell on what really happened. Katya sobbed into Rem's chest as Rem nodded to leave this to her, and as Subaru and Jamal left the cabin, Jamal apologized for having to make Subaru play such a nasty role. Subaru asks if Todd was special to him too, and after pondering it, Jamal touched the eye patch covering his right eye with his finger. Dunno. If the bastard had survived, I would have laughed it off, being that we both failed to die, but that possibility is completely gone. Well, if he died fighting, then he did his job as an Imperial soldier, though he mocked that hardcore. It's just, don't think that son of a bitch dies so easily. What Katya said is true. I haven't seen him actually die. As Subaru was about to involuntarily object, Jamal's finger flicked the former's forehead. Having silenced him, Jamal jerked his chin toward the door behind him, telling Subaru to clam it, and that there is hope for Katya. Subaru could not discern whether the hope Jamal spoke of was a bright or a cruel one. However, he understood that he was not qualified to interfere. Only those who were invited and allowed to participate in Katya and Todd's lives had the right to interfere with their feelings. Subaru was not qualified to do so. Damn, for a guy who hated to fight, you had quite the hot-blooded attitude. And because of that, you crossed a far more dangerous bridge than I did. Looking up at the ceiling of the hallway, Jamal made that critique of Todd. Even though Jamal did not show his face, even though his voice trembled, Subaru was still not qualified to point this out. Hello, Subaru. You're looking well, aren't you? You've been looking more youthful. I wonder if it's thanks to the food of the Empire. Amazing. The only person that can make such a gaudy joke after seeing me like this is Roswell. Oh my, no one else was calm enough to do that, were they? By the way, for the time being, in this place I go by the name Dudley. From now on, let's get along, okay? Subaru and Roswell were not the only ones present. Amelia and Beatrice, who had come here earlier, were sitting at the same table as Ram. Little Barusu, what happened with Rem? Shouldn't she be with you? You really didn't need to use that prefix. Right now, Rem is with Katya. For this discussion, I don't think we'll be seeing her face. Spilling out a sigh, Ram did not dig any further into Subaru's answer. He looks around the table before asking where the rest of the party is, like Petra, Frederica, and Garfield. Amelia says Petra and Frederica are taking care of the soldiers that are fighting, Garfield as well. He's busy with the wounded. He asks if the fight is still ongoing, and wonders if the zombies are still clinging on. Otto asks what that strange name he brings up means, and Subaru informs them that it is a dead person that can move around. In my hometown, we call them zombies. I thought it'd be better if they had a name, so I called them that for convenience's sake. I see, that's good. Zombies. At least we can avoid calling them corpse soldiers. Roswell remarks as he crosses his arms. Subaru ruminated on the words corpse soldiers that had come from his mouth. Something like that. It seems like it's connected to some bad memories, huh? That is indeed the case. It's one of the memories that I don't wish to remember. Beatrice scoots her chair forward before she begins to speak. As discussed in the Imperial capital, it's safe to say that this is the result of the sacrament of the Immortal King, I suppose. According to the records, it was used most recently during the Kingdom's Civil War, in fact. At Subaru's gaze, Roswell gave a vague smile as he declined to say anything further. Roswell had deep knowledge of the past. Even if he himself had not participated in the Civil War, he might still have had a bad experience with the sacrament. But as far as Betty knows, that secret art is meant to be an unstable product, I suppose. To create such a great number of zombies and reproduce it so well, it should be impossible, in fact. But they were actually moving and talking, so there must be some reason for it, right? Betty is also scratching her head, I suppose. Dudley, you shouldn't be slacking off, in fact. And so, just like that, as Subaru's conversation with the others came to a close, Your Excellency, according to a report I received from General Second Class Kafma, they will remain in the Gyral Tropics to keep an eye on the stragglers as much as possible. Also, from General First Class Olbart, he is using delaying tactics with the shinobi under his command. However, he said that since their opponent has no need to resupply water or food, it seems that what he can do decreases by about half. As for Kafma Irelix and Obart Dunkelkin, tell them to continue their operations as they have been doing. Serena Drakeroy, what of your flying dragon ship? It is yet to return. Hopefully the fact that it is taking longer than anticipated doesn't mean that the fortified city has fallen. If it performs the purpose it was built to do, the fortified city should not be unprepared. And so, with the flurry of several footsteps and the important talk flying around, Abel and 3 of his retainers, an old man, a large man, and a beautiful woman, arrived within the carriage. All of you are here? Good. Then we can begin the war council. I've already told everyone in the battalion that I'd speak as the representative. There's something I want to discuss with everyone, especially Beako. Vincent tells him to proceed, but there was one companion whose movements had not yet been confirmed. What about Priscilla? Subaru asks. Speaking of a face he had not seen, he also had not seen Cecile's either, but his moodiness was the same as it was before they left Geenenhive, so he was not as concerned about him. However, once Subaru did ask about them, Abel fell silent and closed one eye. Suspicious of his reaction, Subaru furrowed his brows as he looked around to see that Abel was not the only one who had such a reaction. For some reason, nobody was saying anything about Priscilla's group's movement. Beako was the first to speak up, saying it was kept secret to avoid agitating him. Emilia turned her attention towards Subaru, who unconsciously held Beatrice's hand tightly, and she paused for a beat. When we were all fleeing together from the Imperial capital, we didn't find Priscilla and Yorna, but I want to believe that they are safe. Subaru's fist clenched tightly in the realization of one thing. Tanza had been looking depressed the whole time. Subaru lashes out, telling Vincent he should have had some bond with Priscilla as well. Priscilla had rushed to his predicament, likely to protect Abel. The exchanges that had followed, while sharp as if they were pointing blades at each other, seemed to have a certain sense of familiarity between two people who knew each other well. Abel must not have been at peace with Priscilla having vanished. Perhaps his earlier distraught reaction in Subaru's cabin was not solely due to this person known as Chisha, who had died. The one to raise an objection to Subaru's attitude had not been Abel himself, but a large man clad in golden armor, the volume of his voice erupting like a volcano. He looked down upon the boy who was hounding the emperor he had pledged allegiance to, screaming down at him that staying in the capital would spell death. Abel silences him, as it is not in Subaru's nature to stay silent. Emilia placed her hand on Subaru's shoulder with lowered eyebrows, telling him that even amidst the bad news, there's also hope. Priscilla and Yorna are both really strong, but not only that, they have the power to influence the others around them. Could it be that Tanza's enhancements are still in place? Naturally, that means Yorna, the wielder of that mystic art, is alive and well, and that is why Emily is not panicking. Yeah, I'm not panicking. And Priscilla is the same way. Priscilla is the same? But that doesn't sound like a very Priscilla-like ability. And I thought Abel said that the soul marriage technique was really difficult to use. Was that a lie? Fool, what is in it for me to deceive you? I do not care what you think of me now, but there is no reason to recklessly provoke animosity here. In any case, though, I do understand Natsuki's impression of Priscilla. She is a user of this so-called soul marriage technique. I've seen it firsthand, though it is limited to her favorite servant. Her favorite Schult? Speaking of which, what about Al? That man. He didn't get on the dragon carriage and instead remained in the capital, in fact. Just as you thought, Subaru. Hey, searching for Priscilla, I suppose. That guy. No way, all by himself? He was of the opinion that by his lonesome, he would be quicker to adapt to changing circumstances. Ram is in agreement with that idea. It would not be a good idea to leave so many people in the Imperial capital under those circumstances. Among the Priscilla camp, Schult was the only one present, who was resting in the cabin. Heinkel, a man of the kingdom of Lagunica and a father of Reinhard. A situation in which that man, caught up in a battle for the Valachian Empire, would end up losing his life was a thought that caused even Subaru, who was not on friendly terms with him, to feel a bitter emotion. The one who began to speak after a heavy silence had fallen over the cabin was Otto, saying he would like to make a firm statement before they start the meeting. As I'm sure you know, we are people of the kingdom. Having acknowledged that we are responsible for crossing the border at a time when we were not allowed to cross, I will state this. We have accomplished our objective. Once we enter Garkla, we will proceed to go northward through the Kawaragi city-states, then return to the kingdom of Lagunica. Before Subaru and Emilia could say anything, Otto told them to stay silent, taking the wind out of their sails. Without turning his gaze to them, Otto's statement had surprised Subaru and Emilia before they would begin to vehemently protest, and had successfully allowed him to make the first moves. You may call it heartless, but Ram is in agreement with Otto's plan. We have retrieved Rem and incidentally the short-limbed Barusu. That is satisfactory. Emilia would call out to her with wistful eyes, and Rem continues on that she should understand that it is far too dangerous to go along when they have accomplished this much without losing anything. Serena sits up, asking Dudley if he agrees with his wife. She's not my wife, but I'm generally in agreement with both of them. In fact, if you look at only at our objectives, I'd say it was a perfect accomplishment. His limbs have become a little shorter, and the girl who was supposed to be asleep has become a tomboy, but the results are excellent. I guess withdrawing to the kingdom here would be the decision with the least fear of losses. Subaru's eyes wandered around. Otto, Ram, and Roswell were the three people in the Amelia camp who had a strong voice in policy-making meetings because of their practical wisdom. Despite being at the top of the Amelia camp, it was not unusual for Amelia and Subaru's opinions to be discarded. So the only one on our side is Beiko? Sorry, Subaru, but Betty is more on their side, in fact. Isn't it far too dangerous to associate any more with the Empire, given that Subaru has shrunk? Subaru's eyes widened in shock due to his partner's unexpected betrayal. However, although she seemed apologetic, there was no sign of Beatrice saying it's a joke. She was saying that because she really cared about Subaru. Gauze lifts Subaru up by the nape, yelling that if they are citizens of the kingdom, then they should leave as soon as possible and that their strength is not required. Amelia steps forward with her hands on her hips and says that she has a strong objection to that. You say that our power isn't necessary, but I don't think that's the case at all. After all, even in a battle for the capital, if it weren't for me, Priscilla, and the others, everyone would have struggled a lot more. All of us were very strong. Isn't that right, Burstets? Burstets notes the contribution of these women, and Serena says that without Beatrice, that white light fired from the palace might have done substantial damage. Otto stands up, putting his hat to his chest. I know it sounds callous, but let me say this. As Gauze says, this is an issue of the Empire. Unlike the necessity of the situation that befell us, to get actively involved from this point on would become an international incident, interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. First of all, why would you want to interfere so badly, Natsuki? Whatever the case may be, it is probably due to your obligation to the people you have come to know of the Empire up to this point, correct? Don't talk like you know what's going on, but anyway, is what I want really so wrong? Not wrong, but I also have to persuade you. Well, what I mean is, what if Natsuki takes all the people who he cannot abandon out of the Empire? Gauze dropped Subaru to the floor, slipping from his fingers. There is no twist, this is just what I'm proposing. That even in these circumstances, we should perform the reckless action of taking the people who want to come with us. Fortunately, we have the right to make that decision. Glancing over, Otto's gaze turned to Roswell. Roswell was supposedly hiding his identity within the Empire, but it was true he was the most powerful man in the Amelia camp. If Otto's opinion were to be accepted, Roswell would be the only one to guarantee the acceptance of those seeking refuge. Roswell shut his yellow eye. At the very least, I'm sure my employer wouldn't refuse. If it keeps them from taking a risk they don't have to take, then it's a necessary expense. Since you're referring to Barusu, with his immature way of thinking, the majority of the people he's latched onto are likely those who do not have the strength to fight. They would not be people that the Empire would regret letting go of. What do you think, Your Excellency the Emperor? If we can reduce the number of casualties in your country as much as possible, our proposal is not a bad one, correct? A very well thought out proposal. The kind that is difficult to easily dismiss. The way of the Empire and Otto were incompatible, not necessarily in terms of ability, but in terms of character. Like Subaru, it seemed Otto did not like the Empire. They were of the same opinion on that. The only thing that Otto was doing on top of that was organizing things based on importance. It felt as if he had gone and fixed a hole in the ship they were meant to ride on his own, but ended up remaking the ship into a different one entirely. The ship had sailed in a different direction from what Subaru had wished, but it flowed and drifted to protect the lives of Subaru's precious ones, heading for a different shore. Subaru knew that this was something that had been thought out in consideration of him and his companions. He knew that, and yet... How about it, Natsuki? This is the best I can do in terms of compromise and consideration. Rather than unsparingly dismissing Subaru's opinions, Otto attempted to accommodate Subaru as much as possible and at the same time, ensure their safety. Subaru had thought of him as a reliable guy, but he was far too troublesome an opponent if they happened to have a serious disagreement. He was a man who should have been given a drink and left in a drunken stupor before this discussion had even occurred. Hey Abel, I have something I want to ask you. Looking at Amelia's profile, Subaru's eyes widened. Unlike Subaru who had been forced into silence, looking frustrated as he tried to find a way out of the situation, neither Amelia's eyes nor her profile showed signs of being outmatched. How many people are there in the Valachian Empire altogether? The civil war this month had probably reduced the number significantly, but it was roughly 50 million or so before that. Amelia let out a short breath, then raised a finger to her lips and looked at Subaru. And then, you heard him, Subaru. For a moment, Subaru failed to catch the meaning of the words that she gave him, and then his eyes immediately widened and his cheeks stiffened. Holding onto Subaru's hesitant hand, Beatrice snuggled up next to him. Betty has already voiced her opinion, but she will always be on Subaru's side, I suppose. Beatrice was almost the same height as Subaru, and her eyes were even closer than usual. As they stared at him, Subaru took a deep breath in and exhaled. Then, still under Amelia's expectant gaze, Subaru looked at Otto. Looking up at him, he spoke. 50 million. Subaru's cheeks contorted into a smile. You told me to take all the people that I can't abandon with me to the kingdom. In that case, the ones I can't abandon are those 50 million people. Otto yells out his name, and Subaru throws up his hands in response. I know, you're the one who's right. I'm the one who's spouting nonsense. I understand that everyone came to save me and Rem, and I get what you're saying, but... Subaru thrust his hound at Otto, who had raised an eyebrow, and while Subaru derided himself, he could not pull his own weight. There was no way that he could have beaten Otto, Ram, and Roswell if he had been forced to reason with them, so then, Subaru would do what he could with Amelia and Garfield on his side. In other words, when faced with logic, he had become unreasonable with an emotional argument. It's one hell of a bad situation. If we leave and the Empire is ruined, then what? Just thinking about it is enough to make me not want to eat. What about the risk we will bear? If we save 50 million strangers but in exchange one of us dies or sustains a wound that cannot be healed, it will be much more painful. I'm not going to let any of us die or get in that kind of trouble. That's an absolute. That's an absolute. So what the hell even matters past that? Subaru retorted to Otto as he quietly cornered him. Then he looked not at Otto but at Roswell, who was standing off to the side with one eye closed. Roswell, you should know. My absolutes are absolutes. I'm Dudley, Subaru, though it'd be somewhat dishonest for me to not nod my head at that question, given my high expectations of your absolutes. Amelia begs Ram, and she caves, as Ram has become so close to the people of the Empire. Amelia hugged her, and Ram responded with an unpleasant look on her face. Subaru begs Otto, and he says that won't work on him. He's not foolish enough to sign a contract when he doesn't know what the price he'll have to pay is. Even if you have 2 or 3 people, I will not budge. Otto preemptively stopped Amelia from joining in again. We would only be taking a risk. There would be no advantages in going along with the thinking of Natsuki and the rest. You do not even satisfy the conditions to persuade me with tears. It was neither Subaru nor Amelia, but Abel who had interjected. You said that there would be no advantages. In that case, the conversation would change if there were to be advantages. If there were any advantage, that is. What in the world do you intend on? I'll say this in advance. There's no possible compensation that can make it worthwhile. Towards a royal candidate of the Kingdom of Lagunica, I formally request your assistance. At Abel's proposition, Otto's expression tightened, and he made a sound with his throat. At the same time, several expressions began to violently tremble, quaking even more so than those of Subaru and his companions. Serena laughed at those words, while Burstett's slitted eyes widened. Gauze spread out his hands and bellowed, "A request for the kingdom's assistance? Something like that is completely unprecedented for the Empire. What matter is it if there is precedence or not? If you say that, what precedent is there for an unsightly emperor to lose the imperial capital to such an impudent bunch? Such a foolish fixation. Is hollow authority without any substance what we need? And that is not so. Right now, the Empire desires to be victorious, to bite off the throats of our enemies, to bathe in their blood, to gorge on their lives. Before any of that, the victory we obtain will be what shapes the Empire's tomorrow. Those who sink their fangs in and become a hindrance, they are all enemies of the law of iron and blood imposed by Vincent of Wallachia. Answer carefully, Gauze Ralphone. Are you my enemy? I beg your excellency's pardon for taking up so much of your time. Never will I be your enemy. Vincent shifted his eye towards Amelia and asked again. You have heard me correctly, royal candidate. The Wallachian Empire formally requests the assistance of the Kingdom of Lagunica to put an end to the situation. Lend us your strength. I am Amelia, just Amelia, one of the royal candidates vying to be the next monarch of the Kingdom of Lagunica, and one who wants to help the Empire that is currently in danger. Slowly lowering her lifted hand, Amelia offered it to Abel. Allow us to help your empire. And thus, Amelia and Abel shook hands, and a historical moment between the Kingdom of Lagunica and the Wallachian Empire was engraved. That event with the Amelia party and the Abel plus Empire party had come to a climax, their exchange ultimately reaching a handshake. Yet Otto, the one who had first suggested something of the sort to begin with, had been left by the wayside. Subaru asks for Otto's opinion, and to that inquiry posed timidly by Subaru, Otto went without replying. Too scared to look at Otto's face, Subaru found being answered with silence greatly troubling. Thoughtlessly, he hugged Beatrice at his side, their cheeks coming to contact. Otto pulls up a chair, then sits down on it with a plop, and brings a hand to his forehead. Well, have you calmed down and settled for my desired compromise? Letting out a long and deep breath, Otto massaged the skin around his eyes. Taking in the words he had declared, Subaru was left stumped, and blinking his eyes alongside a no way he spoke. You thought this would happen from the beginning? I did not think it would turn out this way, but I was eager to do something this big, because I did not know just how many concessions Emperor Vincent would present. But since you and Amelia would not change your opinions anyway, Natsuki, I needed to devise some compromises. Faced with that nonchalant response of Otto's, Subaru's mouth was left agape. In disbelief, Subaru turned around. However, his eyes met those of Roswell and Ram. Then those two also bore looks on their face that said that, for the most part, they had generally understood everything. Unexpectedly, the clapping of hands rang out within the cabin. Dearie me, feels like I've just stumbled upon something incredibly delightful. So darn amazing. It's quite a big deal. Loud applause had been produced, and reflexively turning around as to see who had clapped their hands, Subaru held his breath upon spotting an unknown figure. In the corner of the cabin, where no one had been, a tall figure now stood before anyone had been able to notice. Clapping their hands together, that person had been watching the exchange taking place until then, without anyone in the cabin having noticed their presence. Gauze adopts a fighting stance, demanding to know who he is and how he got here. Ah, darn. Well, I accidentally clapped even though no one called for me. This won't do, this won't do. It's a bad habit of mine to give unconscious praise to any praiseworthy children that I find. And before Gauze, his expression having become blood-curdling, that person kept their indifferent attitude, as if everything were unrelated to them, biting the golden Kisaru they had retrieved from a pocket, donning a shrewd smile. Nearly 2 meters tall and sporting black body hair, their blank, smiling countenance had some charm to it, and alongside their unkempt fur, they gave off the impression of a gentle dog person, dressed in a kimono and biting on a Kisaru, having appeared unnoticed in the couple dragon carriages where many key figures of the Empire had assembled. That existence naturally attracted the attention of all those present. Well, name's Hannibal. Mind if I pop in to give you a quick howdy? Thus he declared. A quick check-in before the end, as I have a few things to say. First of all, of course, Al is conveniently separated from Ram. We'll truly never get to see them interact again outside of that Arc 1 side story. Speaking of Al, I imagine he has quite a lot of skin in this game right now. Of course, Priscilla is missing, but I imagine it rings especially true for Al, who is racked with the guilt of failing to protect someone important to him once in the past. Al Kino is probably on the way. I'm also quite interested in Priscilla, of all people who never takes L's, taking an L. It's one of the few times that things have ended up this way, but of course, knowing her, it'll all work out. There is also Heinkel, who was now left behind to fight in a place he has no interest or intention fighting for. Priscilla Camp is well poised to get some good content. I also like the little points of contention here with Otto and Subaru. Subaru, as he himself puts it, does not use logic, making purely emotional arguments, and it's not as if you can't see where he's coming from, but Otto is also working from a very pragmatic approach. They have secured Rem and Subaru, nobody had died, it's time to get the fuck out of here. But just like always, Subaru is going to trample on that to save people, but he's going to have to deal with the social consequences of that. And again, I do believe Arc 8 is about accepting loss. Will there be a heavy price to pay for Subaru's meddling here? I guess we'll see. Despite not being a fan of some of Emilia's Arc 7 scenes, she has been showing some great intellect in Arc 8, with her appraisal of Vincent as well as knowing exactly what Subaru would want, and asking how many people in the country there are to save. However, I do not think things are going to be all sunshine and rainbows for her because the political ramifications of participation in Valakian affairs will likely show its head eventually, especially now with Hallibal's presence and Kawaragi's involvement. You can watch my royal selection video for more of that though. Well, let's get to the end of Arc 8 Phase 1. Speaking in a carefree tone, the Beastman scratched his head, giving a large grin as he gnawed on his golden Kisaru. Vincent is one of the few to speak out. The admirer, What business does the cornerstone of the city-states have here? If you have to think about it that hard, then the name ain't too much of a big deal. Well, that's just what they'd be calling me since I like to give lots of praise, and something like the cornerstone can be chalked up to 'em overestimating me. 'Cause in Kararagi, there ain't nobody stronger than I am. Gauze thrust his mace towards Hallibil, and with his similarly colored Kisaru, he suppressed Gauze's mace from moving up, down, left, and right, and of course, from thrusting forward. It was the utmost pinnacle of technique. Emilia says, "You aren't our enemy, right?" Hallibil's large mouth relaxed into the shape of a smile. "A half-devil child being so upfront, you must be quite the good lassie. Even though you're hated by others just like I am, you've been raised to be honest. Your folks must have been quite the admirable people." Vincent says that due to the Empire's attitude regarding wolf people, to then cross the border and step foot in here, he truly appears to be considerably reckless. Hallibal retorts that the reason he isn't hiding the fact that he's a wolf person is because nobody is around that can kill him. Vincent asks once again what his business here is, and Hallibal assures them that there is no need to be so tense. He came here to say hi, like he said from the beginning. Gulping down his saliva, Subaru had imagined something frightening upon understanding Hallibal's attitude. He was one that could kill everyone in the room without them ever knowing he was here. But that was something he was not doing. If both Reinhard and this person are truly upright, then that predicament with Ceci was... Cease this, Natsuki Subaru. Your cooperation may have been requested, but I have no memory of permitting you to investigate our country's scandals. Emilia points out that the Kararagi border is still further ahead, so he couldn't have come here at caution, right? Hallibal replies that it would be faster if they asked his employer. Subaru followed his gaze. His wolfen face had turned towards the door connecting to the adjoined carriage. Exactly 1 beat later, someone knocked on the door. Zakir enters and informs Vincent that Serena's dragon ship has returned. With them were brought leading figures from Garkla, as well as visitors from Kararagi. Gaining the permission of the Emperor, and before anyone could notice, Hallibal opened the door of the carriage with his hand, showing the visitor inside. Been quite a while since we last came face to face, but I'm real glad to see you're doing well. Even so, Emilia and the rest of y'all are quite the experts at happening across troublesome situations. Looks like you're going to need our strength yet again. with an informal tone and wearing a smile and having a merciless evaluation. With her light purple hair all tied up and her arms through the sleeves of her kimono, it was a woman clad in a fox scarf, Anastasia Hoshin. By her side followed her attendant, a young man dressed in Japanese-style clothing. I had wanted to say I'm glad for your safety, but why is there always something up with you? Don't say stuff like I'm always causing trouble on the level of turning small. Upon their reunion, instead of joy, it was an angry voice that had erupted. As all the strength vanished from his knees, he fell forward and collapsed onto the ravaged plain, lacking even the willpower to support his body. The ground mercilessly crashed into his face. Not even the slightest bit of strength remained. If he had lost all willpower, then his physical strength would not take long to vanish entirely either. And now that both had completely run out, he would probably rot away and die at the very spot on which he had collapsed. Absolutely everything, absolutely anything and everything, had been in vain. The things he had tried to do, the things he had been enraged that he needed to do, the things that he had continued to do purely out of habit, absolutely all of it had been in vain. In the end, he could not possibly be anything other than himself. The thing called hell was something that existed within him. In that case, there was no way he could ever escape it. There was nobody who could escape it. Nobody could escape from the hell bearing the name of oneself. Vexation leaked out in a parched voice from his lips. At this point, not even tears would well up anymore. Neither did he have the passion, nor the qualifications for such a thing. Everything was so damn bizarre. It was not a place that he could reach. Reaching out toward a place he could not reach, that had been the biggest mistake of his life, and yet he had done the exact same thing again. There had been no introspection. That was why he could do nothing but regret. There was no chance that he could ever be able to like somebody like himself, so he could do nothing but hate who he was, until finally he grew to utterly loathe his way of being. He was not even able to continue to love those whom he loved. Enough already. Failures who were as fucking worthless as himself should just hurry up and... Oh? Thought I'd just strip all the possessions off a dead body, but to think you still got some breath in you. That deserves a bravo. Bravo. Are you frustrated about something, Mr. Collapsed? Buddy, with your whole body still alive and well, it'll be nothing more than a blink of an eye. To think I'm still alive. Whoa there. So it's the type where you've gotten all fed up with living? My. As far as I'm aware, there's only one way to fight off those kind of gloomy thoughts. What are we going to do? Ain't it obvious? We're off to drink tons of booze. Enough that you could bathe in it. The person grabbed him by the collar and began dragging him along through sheer force. A man stretching out both of his legs quickly moved across the wasteland. I'm Rowan, the stingy Ronin. What about you, buddy? It's Heinkel. Thus, with neither of them realizing the position of the other, Heinkel Estrella gave his name. He could not have known that coincidence and predestination were some old tricks that fate always liked to make use of. Arcade Phase 1 was very, very good, some of the best ReZero has to offer, with incredible climaxes with Subaru and Todd as well as Subaru and Vincent, and some promising setup with other characters. I also want to give a thanks to Witch Cult Translations and their team for preparing these chapters for us to be able to read and enjoy. Without them, we would still be hard stuck multiple years behind with the End Price translations. I went back and retroactively added links to their website in every Phase video, and I'll also do the same for this one, so make sure you show your support to these people that make this possible. Until Phase 2 then. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the funny YouTube algorithm. You can also become a YouTube member, which gives you access to behind-the-scenes content, a badge on comments and livestream chats, as well as the use of emotes and videos before their actual release. You can also check the description for socials like Twitter, where I'm objectively correct all the time, and Discord, where we talk about ReZero, My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen, and stuff like that. That's about it though. Thank you for watching. See ya.